The only choices available are to give up or to refuse to give up. A heroine grips a pair of scissors, ready to cut her own hair with a determined snip. She resolves that she will not give up on her goal within the world of royal lovers. In an otome game, a happy ending is guaranteed if the heroine chooses you as her love interest. This means even a villainess can become a capture target if she cross-dresses as a man. The plan is to compete with the other handsome love interests for the heroine's heart. To achieve this, she must transform into a noble and fabulous handsome man. She issues a bold challenge, telling the other handsome guys to just wait and see. Her story began on a spring day when she was 7, as a memory of a past life surfaced during a meal. While eating, a shocking realization struck her with the force of a lightning bolt. The unmistakable texture belonged to her old nemesis, the bell pepper. The bell pepper shock made her pass out, and in that moment, the opening of an otome game she knew flashed in her mind. She understood the classic trope. She had been transmigrated into a character from a game she played in her previous life. A maid calls out, "Lady Elizabeth," as she clatters to the floor, confirming she is now in the world of the romantic simulation game Royal Lovers. Lying in her bed, Elizabeth quietly contemplates this sudden, world-altering revelation. She tries to recall her past life, but the details are a blur. She can't remember her name or how she died, only that she was a girl. While most of her past is foggy, her memory of the otome game that is now her reality remains crystal clear. A jolt of shock runs through her as she considers how unlucky her past life must have been. She reasons that with no memory of death by sickness, accident, or old age, and her only strong hatred being for taxes, her life must have been remarkably plain. If a normal life is katsudon, her past was like rice gruel. She dismisses it to focus on the more serious worries of her new existence. A dark premonition tells her that her current self may be destined to experience terrible things in the future. She has been reborn as Elizabeth Burton, the so-called villainess of Royal Lovers, a character so insignificant she is practically an extra. Elizabeth is merely a nuisance character, engaged to one of the love interests, whose bullying of the heroine leads to her public humiliation. If the heroine pursues her fiancé's route, her engagement will be annulled, making her a disgrace to her family and unable to secure a proper marriage. In a world where noble ladies marry in their teens, this is a deeply humiliating fate for someone of her high rank. The problem is that her fiancé is the second Prince Robert, a primary love interest in the game. Robert is the face of the game, famously known for being gullible and easy for the heroine to win over. She knows that if the heroine simply follows the game's plot, she will inevitably fall into Robert's route, an outcome Elizabeth's ducal pride cannot accept. Breaking the engagement now is difficult because he's a prince, but waiting until she is 17 means it will be annulled anyway, leaving her a problematic old spinster. She recalls how the love interests in the game were initially cold and mistreated the heroine because of her commoner background. Gritting her teeth, she fumes at the injustice of the handsome men being forgiven for their cruelty while she, a minor character, faces ruin. It feels completely unfair to be treated this way just because she is a different gender, despite having an equally high-class background and nice appearance. Suddenly, her eyes widen as a powerful realization strikes her. She asks herself a simple question: why not just become one of the love interests? The world of Royal Lovers is one filled with happy endings, and any love interest the heroine chooses is guaranteed a good one. Since she already possesses knowledge of the game's events, she can simply steal them from the other guys. With newfound resolve, she clenches her fist, determined to create an Elizabeth route and secure her own happy ending by making the heroine fall for her instead of her fiancé. The game's story begins when the heroine turns 17 and awakens her powers as a saint, giving Elizabeth a decade to prepare for her new role. The first step is taken with a decisive snip of her long hair. Her actions become swift and decisive as she vows to challenge the handsome boys for the heroine's affection. She immediately begins a rigorous training program of sword practice, a diet for growth, and studying romance novels. She changes into men's clothing and applies makeup, successfully transforming into a fairly handsome young man. To differentiate herself from the many long-haired love interests, she keeps her hair short, a decision that brought her parents to tears. However, her father, Duke Burton, lived up to his respectable title by not punishing her, instead questioning her eccentric behavior and warning her of the consequences. He looks her in the eyes and asks directly for the reason she is behaving this way. She is internally amazed at her father's rational approach, though she knows she can't possibly explain her true motives of seducing a game protagonist 10 years in the future. Her brother watches them, his expression unreadable and serious. To her surprise, her brother bows deeply before their father and begs him to allow Liz to do as she wishes. He fervently insists that his sister is working incredibly hard towards some goal. Elizabeth knows he is right. She is more serious about sword practice than he is because she must become strong to be a believable love interest. She also diligently attends all her dance and etiquette lessons, though she focuses on learning the men's parts. Her brother, completely misinterpreting her motives, explains to their father that she is studying a great deal, while Elizabeth sweats, thinking about how she is actually learning to seduce girls. As her brother continues to plead on her behalf, she feels a swell of admiration for him. She sees that her brother is someone who can help another person without a moment's hesitation. The thought solidifies her resolve. If her brother ever found himself in trouble, she would rush to his aid, just as he is doing for her now. Her father watches the scene unfold, his expression thoughtful. After gaining her family's permission, she throws herself into self-improvement, even convincing her mother her interest in plays was for makeup research, though she felt guilty for her mother's subsequent disappointment that it was for men's makeup. After a month, she has perfected her new look, proudly assessing herself as a quite attractive guy. A year of diligent self-improvement passes, and at 8 years old, her calcium-focused diet has made her grow 20 centimeters, and though she still hates bell peppers, her palate has expanded. Her swordsmanship shows even more striking changes, revealing that the body of Elizabeth Barton has a natural talent for the blade. She quickly surpasses not only her brother but also her private instructor in practice battles. More importantly than anything else, she has discovered a genuine passion for working out and building muscle. Immersed in her training, she almost forgot her identity as the daughter of a duke. That is, until her fiancé's 8th birthday party, an event which she must attend in proper female attire. Though she would rather not go, her attendance is mandatory. Thankfully, since it is before her societal debut, she only needs to greet people and won't be expected to dance. She observes Prince Robert, noting that he certainly looks like his character from the game. As she continues watching him from a distance, her assessment continues. She is impressed by his beautiful, almost artificial appearance, a true 2.5D Otome game character, but she can't help but notice the unpleasant look in his eyes. Once the formal greetings are concluded, she excuses herself by saying she's going to look at the flowers. She dashes quickly away from the crowded ballroom. Her plan is to hide out in the garden for a while, confident that looking for pretty flowers is a plausible excuse if anyone finds her. Hiding among the plants, she overhears a group of boys cornering another, accusing him of being arrogant and cocky. They sneer at him, telling him not to get carried away just because he's the son of the Prime Minister. She instantly recognizes the bullied boy with glasses as Isaac, one of the capture targets from Royal Lovers. She realizes this persistent bullying is what causes his personality to become so distorted later, making him an extremely difficult character to capture. Her first instinct is to leave quietly and find an adult, knowing it isn't her place to intervene directly. However, a smile spreads across her face as she realizes this is a golden opportunity. This is the perfect chance to test the skills she has been honing, and so she steps out and cheerfully greets Isaac. The bullies, unaware that she is the fiancée of the party's host, tell the young lady to mind her business and leave them to their chat. One of the boys mockingly invites her to join their chat, while Elizabeth notices Isaac trembling, recognizing her immediately. Isaac shouts for them to stop, telling them she has nothing to do with it, but the bullies only laugh at his attempt to protect her. The lead bully shoves Isaac to the ground, telling him not to be so corny and show off in front of a girl. Elizabeth steps forward between them, her expression hardening as she asks if they intend to stop. The bullies laugh, taunting Isaac for needing a girl's protection, while he weakly tells Elizabeth not to worry about him. As a punch flies toward Isaac, Elizabeth's hand shoots out, grabbing the attacker's wrist and blocking the blow. She plants her feet firmly, sliding into a throwing stance. With a sharp twist, she uses the boy's own momentum against him. The bully is sent spinning through the air with a startled cry. His friends stare in stunned disbelief at what just happened. Without pausing, Elizabeth moves on to the next boy. And then the last, sending them both flying through the air with a powerful swish. For a brief moment, she worries she might have thrown them too far, perhaps all the way to the nearby stables. She clenches her fist, satisfied that she was able to settle the situation peacefully. Turning to the fallen Isaac, she asks if he's all right, inwardly celebrating a great victory. She has made a captured target indebted to her without making him an enemy. Her victory is short-lived as a terrified Isaac asks if she plans to toss him too, making her realize with dismay that he is now scared of her. Isaac gets to his feet, insisting he didn't need her help and had a plan to stop them himself, prompting Elizabeth to reflect on his difficult relationship with his brothers. She recalls his family situation. As the third son of the Prime Minister, he's a political tool to be married off, unlike his successor older brother and the backup second son. Isaac reveals that he was already planning to ruin the bullies and their families, having investigated them thoroughly as revenge for the victimization he endured from his own arrogant brothers. Elizabeth smiles sheepishly, realizing he was telling the truth and her help was unnecessary. Making an enemy of an intelligent person like him would be frightening. She knows he has years of patient waiting ahead of him, but eventually he will enter the academy as a handsome, genius scholar, and no one will dare bully him then. She smiles warmly at him and says with conviction, "You are a strong man." Isaac is stunned into silence, looking at her with wide eyes as he softly repeats her name. Waving a cheerful goodbye, she tells him she'll see him around and quickly sneaks away from the garden. Isaac stares after her, a blush spreading across his face as he touches his chest and wonders aloud, "Strong to me?" Elizabeth Burton, now 10 years old, finds herself facing a problem. In the past 2 years of her self-improvement journey, she has grown to 160 centimeters, perfected her makeup and etiquette, and started training with the knight's instructor, all while observing that the maids of the estate are easily flustered by men. As a maid brings her tea, a simple "thanks" from Elizabeth is enough to make the young woman blush deeply. She has learned that a mere wink or an offer to carry something makes the maid swoon, though this has unfortunately caused them to slack off at their jobs. While her progress is going well and her popularity is slowly growing, a significant issue still stands in her way. Her charm is only effective on maids who are unaccustomed to men, whereas the game's heroine is the main character, capable of making all the love interests fall for her as if the game were on easy mode. When she compares herself to the sparkling and radiant handsome men on the game's cover, she feels like nothing more than a slightly tall, slightly handsome, and unimpressive extra. It is for this reason that she must find a way to compete with these men and ultimately win the heroine's heart. As she worries about her future direction and her lack of innate appeal points, a knock on the door announces that her father has summoned her. Her father stands before her, presenting a young boy named Christopher. He explains that the boy is a distant relative whom he has adopted following an incident, and that he will now be her younger brother. Elizabeth is completely surprised, having thought the family might be getting a dog, and her mind briefly leaps to the conclusion that Christopher could be her father's illegitimate child. She studies Christopher's small, delicate frame, noting that her own appearance is more masculine, and feels a blush creep onto her face as she looks at him. A sudden jolt of recognition strikes her as she realizes this is Chris, one of the love interests from the game Royal Lovers. She recalls from her knowledge of the game that Chris only reveals his surname and his complicated family history when the player pursues his specific route. In the game's narrative, Christopher plays the role of a prankster underclassman who often gives the heroine trouble, but his inherent cuteness always earns him forgiveness. She remembers that his mischievous behavior stems from being abandoned by his biological parents and growing lonely, leading her to the troubling realization that she is now the older stepsister of a capture target she intends to deceive. While her own parents seem to keep their distance from the new boy, her older brother interacts with him warmly. She observes her brother doting on Christopher with a clumsy but genuine affection. Elizabeth has to admit that the boy is undeniably adorable and possesses a quality that makes one want to protect him. Though Christopher seems a little confused by all the attention from his new older brother, he does not appear to be completely lost or unhappy. She begins to believe they can become a close family, especially since her father and brother are popular dukes, but then a new idea for an appeal point strikes her. During her next swordsmanship lesson, her instructor sharply points out that she let her guard down because she was lost in thought. The instructor expresses his disappointment, stating that a wandering mind during a match goes directly against a knight's code of conduct. The phrase, "knight's code of conduct," immediately piques her interest. Her simple question flips a switch in her instructor, who launches into a passionate lecture about chivalry, the duty to be respectful, fight seriously, help the weak, and use power correctly. Elizabeth thinks to herself that the life of a knight sounds both admirable and popular. Inspired by the lecture and thankful for her solid foundation in swordsmanship, she bows to her instructor and requests another sparring match. From that day forward, she fully commits herself to fighting with a serious and chivalric spirit in all things. She begins to learn everything she can about chivalry, which she comes to understand as a gentleman's code of behavior comprising morals and ethics. This new focus brings unexpected benefits, improving her posture and making her movements more graceful, and she uses her newfound efficiency in training to work out even more, her new obsession being squats while carrying her brother. As she masters all types of chivalry, the flaws in her swordsmanship decrease until she finally defeats her instructor in a match, yet she still feels the desire to gain more skills. Her training is suddenly interrupted when her older brother bursts through the door, slamming it open as he shouts her name in a panic. He frantically asks if Christopher has been there, and as Elizabeth asks what's wrong, she recognizes that this must be a key event from the game's plot. Her brother explains that Chris is missing, it's almost time for dinner, and he hasn't been feeling well for the past few days. Gritting her teeth, Elizabeth feigns ignorance of the situation while her brother voices his worries. With their parents away in the city, he is near tears, terrified that he has failed in his duty to protect his younger sibling. Elizabeth has a soft spot for her brother's crying and resolves to act immediately, wondering if Chris still felt out of place despite her brother's kindness. She steels herself and tells her brother that she understands, and that they will go find that naughty child together and bring him back. She knows from her game knowledge that Christopher has most likely gone to find his biological mother. In the game's plot, he accidentally overhears news that his mother, who he thought was dead, is still alive, so he sneaks out of the house to look for her, only to see her looking happy with a new family. This tragic discovery in the game caused Christopher's character to stop trusting anyone. Elizabeth realizes her parents must have been waiting for the right moment to tell him the truth about his abandonment. Knowing this event will shape him into the lonely prankster from the game if she does not intervene, she tells her older brother to get on her back so they can hurry. Her brother agrees without hesitation, and as she runs with him, Elizabeth understands that this deep-seated feeling of being an outsider must have been the real reason Chris felt so isolated in their family. They find a distraught Christopher in the street, and she tells her brother to hide while she approaches, wondering why Chris is acting so strangely. She runs towards him with her arms outstretched, intending to comfort him. Suddenly, she hears men shouting in the background and instinctively tackles Christopher, pulling him into the bushes and covering his mouth to silence him. They hide in silence as the men rush past, yelling orders to catch the boy. After the danger passes, her brother emerges from hiding, relieved to see them safe, while Elizabeth asks Christopher if he's now involved with hooligans. Her brother gravely corrects her, identifying the men not as hooligans but as kidnappers, which makes Elizabeth realize Chris's feminine features make him an ideal target for ransom. The kidnappers spot them again, and as her brother pulls her to flee, she puzzles over why unguarded noble children are being targeted in this area. Seeing that Christopher is completely frozen with fear, Elizabeth excuses herself and lifts him into her arms. He is as light as a feather, and she tells the petite young boy to hold on tight as she prepares to run. With a determined glint in her eye, she carries Christopher while her brother holds on to her from behind, and the three of them run through the streets. They finally reach a quiet, deserted alley where she declares that they should be safe for the moment. Her brother asks to be put down, joking that his marriage prospects will be ruined if anyone saw his little sister carrying him around. She gently sets her older brother back on his feet. He smiles kindly at Christopher and asks if he was in great trouble. Christopher looks up at them, tears welling in his eyes as he whispers a heartfelt apology. He breaks down completely, crying that it's all his fault for sneaking out by himself and causing them so much trouble. Between hiccups and sobs, he repeatedly apologizes and begs them not to be mad at him for his actions. Her brother gently pats Christopher's head, reassuring him that they weren't mad at all, just very worried about him. He softly tells him that instead of saying he's sorry, perhaps he should say, "Sorry for making you worry," and the kind words seem to strike a deep chord with the distraught boy. As her brother cheekily offers to teach Chris how to sneak out of the mansion properly next time, Elizabeth chides him for encouraging that kind of behavior. Christopher finally explains that he heard his mother was alive and ran off to meet her, confirming Elizabeth's suspicion that he must have overheard traveling merchants talking to the servants. Elizabeth internally seethes with anger, vowing to identify and ban the merchants who spread such a damaging and careless rumor about their client's son. Christopher quietly says that his mother is no longer his mother, his words revealing that even his kind older brother didn't know about her remarriage. He cries that he saw her laughing happily with an unfamiliar man and carrying a new baby, leaving him feeling as if he has no family left in the world. Elizabeth begins to comfort him, acknowledging that they haven't been living together as a family for very long. Her brother joins in without missing a beat, telling Christopher that from the very start, they have both wanted to become his family. He elaborates on his vision of what a family is: people who eat together, worry for one another, help each other, and share secrets, and asks Christopher to wait for them and give this new life a chance. As Elizabeth once again carries a tired Christopher on her back, she teases him about being uncomfortable, which he shyly denies. She explains that everyone would worry if he went home with a tear-streaked face, and he stares at her with a deep, unreadable blush. She gently lands back on the ground, setting him down carefully. She struggles to find the right comforting words, realizing that for all her training in chivalry, the only lines that come to mind are those meant to seduce women, not console a heartbroken child. Then, a bright idea comes to her in a flash. Remembering that knights are figures all boys admire, she decides to borrow her brother's approach and kneels before Christopher, solemnly declaring, "I am your knight." She vows that even though she is a girl and cannot be a knight who protects the entire country, she will become a knight who protects her treasured family and the people she holds most dear. Silently, she adds to herself that in 7 years, she will steal the game's main character, whom Christopher was supposed to save, but she thinks it's not a bad plan. But as his sister, standing here right now, she genuinely and truly hopes that he can be happy. She hopes that her promise to be his hero can provide him with the slightest bit of support he needs to find happiness, even without a heroine in his life. She looks at him with a gentle, reassuring smile and asks, "Will you let me protect you?" After a pointed cough from her older brother, a flustered Christopher nods his agreement with a shy, "yes." Elizabeth then lightheartedly declares that his punishment for sneaking out of the mansion without permission is to run 30 laps, earning a protest from her protective older brother not to bully their cute younger sibling. The two older siblings share a conspiratorial and knowing smile. A blushing Christopher looks on at their interaction, realizing that what his new brother had said about them was true. Elizabeth reaches out and grabs his hand firmly in hers. The three siblings walk away together down the quiet street. Christopher thinks to himself that the day they all truly become a family may not be so far away after all. Elizabeth Burton, now 12 years old, has grown taller and cut her hair short, perfecting her masculine disguise. Her instructor introduces a man named Greed from the Knight Order Academy who wishes to observe her training. She agrees to a mock battle and quickly wins, all while noting Greed's powerful stance and his intensely evaluating gaze. After the match, her instructor bows and states that he has nothing more to teach her now. Believing she is being expelled, she is shocked when he clarifies that she has simply become too strong to be taught by him any longer. He confirms that the mock battle was a test, with Greed as the observer, for her to be accepted as an assistant instructor. The news is so sudden it hasn't properly sunk in. She clenches her fist, knowing she still lacks real combat experience. Her instructor then relinquishes his position entirely, explaining that her 17-year-old brother, Earl Burton, is in his final year and no longer requires swordsmanship training. Her brother inherited his Earl title last year and plans to build achievements before taking over as head of the family, so he no longer needs to practice with her. When she protests that she is not strong enough, he explains that a different teacher would be more suitable for Christopher's basic training. She declares that she aspires for something far beyond being merely strong enough for a noble lady, a sentiment her instructor is aware of. It is for this reason, he explains, that he brought Greed with him today. She is stunned, having not sensed Greed's presence at all, and learns he is an instructor for the West Training Grounds in the royal capital. Her former instructor explains that the East Training Grounds attract the sons of high-status nobles, leaving the West perpetually short-handed. Greed extends a formal offer, asking the young lady to come and work for him now that she is an assistant instructor. The suggestion could not have been more perfect for her goals. The opportunity to train with other instructors after hours, earn a salary, and compare her strength against other boys preparing for the academy is an ideal situation. However, at only 12 years old, she cannot accept the position without her father's permission, a difficult prospect since the training grounds are near the imperial palace he frequents. After agonizing over it, she decides she cannot hide it and asks her father directly, lying that she will be learning, not teaching, to which he reluctantly agrees. The decision was only secured because her brothers, Big Bro and Christopher, pleaded on her behalf, which surprised and moved her father, as she rarely asks for anything. She is relieved, knowing that if she couldn't go to the training ground, her brothers would have been subjected to her harsh training menu at home. On her first day of training, she is assigned to be in charge of the new cadets and must change into the differently colored instructor's uniform. Donning the uniform, she assesses that it makes her look at least 20% more handsome. She is now nearly 170 centimeters tall, and the uniform's dark, vertical design, paired with boots, makes her appear even taller, an essential quality for a capture target. The specially ordered elevator boots will put her at eye level with the other instructors, a fact confirmed when a knock at the door signals it is time to proceed. She steps into the room where the other instructors and cadets are waiting, her boots clacking on the floor. As an instructor slaps her on the back and jokes about puppy training, she realizes that while she has incorporated knightly elements into her persona, she still lacks a distinctive charm to stand out. She resolves to give teaching her best try, despite it being her first time. She raises her hand, a glint of light catching on her skin. She stands before the seated group of new cadets, ready to begin. The cadets whisper among themselves, seated on the ground just like in a gym class from her past life in Japan. She observes that they are all good-looking as expected in an otome game, but they seem more childish than she anticipated. She knows that first impressions are everything and expects that her lean, toned body, unlike the other muscular instructors, will cause them not to take her seriously. To seize control, she lets out a sudden, ferocious shout, ordering the scums to shut their flapping traps. The cadets are stunned into shocked silence. She knows these privileged children have likely never been called scum before, and she presses her advantage, telling them they stink of pee and are unfit to be cadets. Calling them trash and maggots, she enacts her Operation Drill Sergeant, a strategy designed to provoke the most prideful among them, who promptly stands and shouts at her. She cannot back down now, so she provokes him further, challenging him to a duel and threatening to add 100 push-ups to his training if he loses. The enraged cadet accepts her challenge without hesitation. Her eyes narrow in focus as the duel begins. With a single, swift motion, she dodges his attack and sends him flying. She may have overdone it, but the display will teach them not to mess with her. Pointing at the fallen cadet, she declares shared responsibility and orders everyone to give her 100 push-ups. Half a year passes under her instruction, and she tests a cadet's strength, asking if he thinks he can do anything with his wimpy arms. Her relentless training has transformed the boys, who she now berates for having poor posture, taking unsanctioned breaks, or acting like babies. They no longer skip basic practice, their reps have gone up, and they finally look like true knight cadets. Their palms have thickened, their posture has improved, and due to her unusual methods, all 60 cadets are now her pupils as other instructors have joined their training. She was supposed to be an instructor, but somewhere along the way, the cadets started calling her Captain, and her regimen Lizzie's boot camp. As a cadet calls out, Captain, she despairs, feeling she is drifting further away from her ideal husbando image. The voice belongs to the boy who challenged her on the first day. He now looks up at her with sparkling eyes and a blushing, eager face. A jolt of shock runs through her as she recognizes him, Gullibert. It's her fiancé, Robert, who she last saw at his 8th birthday party. He explains he got a haircut to improve his training, and she realizes he copied her style. She berates him, calling him scum for thinking a mere hairstyle change would make him stronger, as he brightly declares he wants to be as strong as her. Their interaction is interrupted by another cadet, who informs her that Instructor Greed is looking for them to discuss a competition. Greed explains that they will be having a friendly match between the West and East training grounds in front of His Majesty, a daunting prospect as the privileged East cadets normally win. But he clenches his fist, declaring that this year will be different. He boasts that his boys have endured hellish training and are the best he's seen in 10 years, a speech Elizabeth thinks makes him sound like a gangster. When asked what the prize for winning is, Greed says there is nothing in particular, much to the cadets' disappointment. He pleads with Elizabeth to show some spirit, but she is distracted, trying to remember how to fix a button like she did in her past life. Greed changes tactics, asking if she would consider a request from him if they win, even though she won't be participating herself. He smiles and tells her that he'll be more motivated if she does. The other instructors look on, shocked by his forwardness. She considers the risks of participating, as her father might be in attendance, and it would not be good for her to be seen beating up other aristocratic sons. With little else she can do, she decides to intensify the training, adding 20 reps to all exercises. The common goal of winning bonds the entire West training grounds, and the cadets begin chanting "Glory to the Burton Corps," much to her horror. As the day of the competition arrives, she wonders if she could convince them to call her Coach instead of Captain. In the arena, the East team demonstrates their synchronized sword swings before a large crowd. Elizabeth observes them, noting their great movements, good physiques, and handsome faces. She can see why they win every year. What's more, their uniforms are a sparkling white, unlike the gray ones her cadets wear to hide dirt and sweat. Her cadets report to her, standing at sharp attention. She tells them that while the East team is bigger, the match is not unwinnable. She takes a deep breath to address her team. She stands before them on a balcony and shouts a rallying cry, "One for all." They respond with a unified roar, "All for one." She gives one final order, "Failure will not be tolerated, maggots." The competition that follows is fierce. The East had better technique, but the West's superior stamina allowed them to wear their opponents down, bringing the competition down to a final deciding match. The West's representative is Robert, who had grown to be their strongest, and he was up against his older brother, the Crown Prince Edward. As his teammates watch, Robert sits alone on a bench, a gloomy aura surrounding him. He mutters to himself, feeling the immense pressure to win the deciding match. Elizabeth observes his nervousness, thinking he is not in a state to win anything. She thinks about the reward she'll get from the instructors if they win, and that winning would feel great for her personally. She strides over to Robert and gives him a hard slap on the back. She tells him to go get M, declaring that his opponent is just a spoiled brat and that it's time for some babysitting. Her words ignite a fire in him, and he responds with a blushing, enthusiastic yes. He clenches his fists and vows to win, shouting, "Captain, just you watch." As he runs off with his team, she feels exactly like a coach in a sports manga. In the end, Robert wins convincingly, besting the Crown Prince in both strength and stamina. The victorious cadets surround Elizabeth, cheering that it's all about the muscles. She congratulates a triumphant Robert, telling him he finally managed to teach his brother a lesson. Her comment makes Robert freeze awkwardly, and he calls her an idiot under his breath. She then recalls that Robert has always hated being compared to his older brother, who excelled at everything. The other cadets had learned not to mention his brother, but in the excitement of winning, some of them slipped up. Robert looks away, quietly processing the fact that he did, in fact, beat his brother. He looks up in genuine surprise, admitting he forgot his opponent was his brother. The cadets look on in confusion. Robert explains that throughout the entire match, he was only thinking about his duty to win for the team. He wasn't obsessed with beating his brother, but was simply happy to share the victory with everyone, realizing he was only nervous because he carried their expectations. The cadets, moved by his words, swarm him in a group hug, and Elizabeth looks on, thinking that friendship and youth are truly beautiful. Later, after a short speech from the king, the instructor Greed announces an after-party, and though Elizabeth plans to decline, her cadets beg their captain to come. She finds it annoying, thinking the boys would have more fun without their superior around, but realizes these guys are just built differently. The cadets walk down a hallway, ready for their celebration. As they walk, Elizabeth sees a brief, sparkling vision of a beautiful, long-haired boy. A cadet asks if the captain is okay, but she dismisses it as nothing and tells them to go on. An ecstatic and drunken Robert suddenly collapses on her, calling out for his captain. At the rowdy party, she finds Robert wasted, having insisted on trying alcohol even though he's a minor. He clings to her, proudly declaring that he did it and it's all thanks to her. She pats his head, telling him he did really well and will definitely get much stronger. Moved to tears, Robert vows he will become a lot stronger than her, and she says she looks forward to it. He leans in close, his face serious, and declares that if he ever does get stronger than her, then at that time. His unfinished sentence hangs in the air between them. The noisy celebration of the party fades into the background. All focus narrows to the prince's intense gaze. He holds her by the shoulders, his expression earnest. Elizabeth stares back, caught completely off guard by the sudden shift in tone. The air is thick with unspoken words and anticipation. The other cadets are oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding. Robert's grip tightens slightly, his resolve clear in his eyes. Time seems to slow down around the two of them. His lips part as if to complete his thought. But the moment is left unresolved, a question without an answer. The future he proposes remains a mystery. A silent, charged cliffhanger concludes the celebration. Elizabeth Burton, now 13 years old, takes another step toward her goal of becoming a capture target. Though training with the instructors has strengthened her, she feels she is missing something important and requests to participate in the patrols. With her request to gain actual experience granted, she prepares for her first day on patrol. This leads to an unexpected summons from Crown Prince Edward, the older half-brother of her fiancé, Robert, and first in line to the throne. She is annoyed by the summons but kneels before him, and he tells her she may rise. He smoothly compliments her, saying his silly brother has praised her quite a bit. When she offers to accommodate him at the training grounds, he declines, stating he is against such brutish activities. He explains that he is not obsessed with swordsmanship like his brother and that it is enough to fulfill the bare minimum expected of a royal. He claims that performing better than most without effort has been both a gift and a curse, and he envies his brother's ability to devote himself so wholly to something. Elizabeth is unsure if he is bragging or if she just has a twisted mind, as she was under the impression he wanted swordsmanship guidance. She is shocked when he waves her away, saying that just meeting her was all he wanted, and she asks to be excused. As she leaves, she grits her teeth, thinking that if he weren't royalty, she would have sent him flying for wasting her time. Putting the irritating encounter behind her, she goes on patrol and later returns home to her brothers. She tells Christopher that the patrol was fun and that she learned a lot, though nothing in particular happened. The first thing she learned was that the town looks exactly like the game's CGs, a sight that moved her deeply. It felt like an otaku pilgrimage, seeing the real-life versions of the cafe from Christopher's route, the accessory shop from Robert's, the bookstore from Isaac's, and the alley from Edward's. The second thing she learned was how the townspeople reacted to her, with young ladies and even older aunties becoming completely charmed by the cool and youthful knight. Her knight image is working extremely well, and she feels she made the right choice, though she has to tell a disappointed Christopher that he can't join her on patrol. Christopher excitedly declares that he will become a knight trainee too, asking if she would let him go with her then. She tells him that while she can ask the other instructors, he will have to convince their father himself, a challenge he happily accepts. And so, while she continued assisting in patrols and impressing the regulars, their father eventually relented to Christopher's earnest request. With her duties as an instructor and on patrol, her days became busy and fulfilling, yet a small issue still troubled her. She was still undecided about the final personality trait she should adopt in addition to being a knight. While her current persona is working well, she feels she lacks the interesting traits of the other capture targets and considers a more cookie-cutter approach. She reviews the others in her mind: Robert's twisted simplicity, Isaac's awkwardness with girls, Christopher's hidden trauma, and Edward's depressing negativity. All of them have an unexpected hidden side, a quality she realizes she will need as well, just as she spots a familiar figure approaching. The man is one of the Crown Prince's personal guards, who informs her that His Highness requests her presence. She finds herself once again in the presence of Prince Edward. Edward explains that Robert had boastfully told him all about his captain and the West training, a story Elizabeth can practically see unfolding. Through this conversation, Edward began to realize how simple-minded his brother was, and that this was likely the first time Robert's inferiority complex had allowed him to speak so much to his older brother. This leads Edward to a startling suspicion, and he asks her if it's possible that Robert is unaware that his captain is his fiancée, Elizabeth Burton. She sighs and closes her eyes, admitting that in all likelihood he is completely clueless. Edward is exasperated, asking how she can be fine with her own fiancé not recognizing her. He points out that their strange relationship is why rumors of them being on bad terms are circulating, and that if there weren't issues, she would have already begun training to be the next queen. She feigns ignorance of any rumors and flatly states she has no intention of becoming queen. She immediately realizes she's made a leading statement and sees Edward peeking at her, itching for her to ask him to elaborate. Wanting to escape the conversation, she says that Christopher is waiting for her and makes to excuse herself. He allows her to leave, but as she walks away, he is left looking dazed. She later reflects that she is not a patient person and is not good at listening to people's troubles. Sometime later, now 14 years old, she is summoned once more by Prince Edward. Her life has become much busier with studying, patrolling, and instructing, and she has no time to cater to the whims of the prince. He asks her to think of Robert, and she wonders what he means, wishing she could just go home. He asks her directly if she thinks Robert is suited to being king. She tries to give a diplomatic answer, stating Robert has no plans for the throne and that he, Edward, will surely be king, but he calls her remark disrespectful. Edward then looks at her with a grave expression and declares that he will never be king. Her attempt to wrap things up quickly has backfired, as he reveals that doctors have only given him 2 to 3 years to live. She understands his behavior now. He's playing the victim, feeling insecure because his impending death is a national secret, and he's haunted by the political maneuvering it will cause. She wants to tell him not to worry, because she knows he isn't going to die. That's it, if she gives him the spoiler, he won't die. In the game, he is saved in both his route and Robert's route, either by the heroine's saintly power or by surgery in a neighboring country. Even though he won't die, the pressure is on her. if she does nothing her engagement will be broken, and she'll be kicked out. She reminds herself that the main character of this story is the romance heroine, and he is just one of many capture targets. She tells him that she never would have thought he was sick and that he displayed great moves in the match, regardless of whether he believes it or not. She remembers that she is short-tempered and has a terrible personality. Elizabeth Burton is, after all, just a villainess, no better than an extra. She decides to break the nose of this capture target who thinks he's the main character and offers to show his highness around the castle. She surprises him by producing her cadet uniform, which she notes should fit him, and tells him she will return for him in the morning. She gives him a smile and says, "See you." He stammers, threatening to call the guards, but she warns him not to do anything that will get her caught. She tells him this is the best way for her, leaving him to wonder how she plans to get him out. Climbing up to his third-floor balcony with ease, she tells a shocked Edward that most knights can climb walls these days. He threatens to call the guards, noting it's not just her head that would be chopped, but she points out that since he's changed clothes, he clearly has no intention of doing so. When he asks how they will get down from the third floor, she dismisses his idea of using bedsheets as a rope. She tells him they can simply jump down. Before he can protest, she lifts him into her arms. As she steps onto the railing, she warns him he might bite his tongue, leaving him to curse her as they leap. They descend rapidly from the third-story window. They land safely in the garden below with a soft thud, leaving the prince stunned and blushing. He asks if they are returning already. She grabs a horse, and he begins to protest, talking nonsense about her stopping. He points out how weird it is for him to be sitting in front of her on the horse. She dismisses his concerns about his safety, winks, and tells him to let her escort him. As they ride through town together, a woman calls out, "Knight-sama." She playfully engages with the crowd, calling them beautiful kittens and soaking in their adoration. Edward stares at her, asking if she isn't a knight, and despite her rank, isn't she acting more like a playboy? The word, playboy, hits her with the force of an explosion. A playboy knight, a frivolous sweet-talker who is kind to all the girls. She realizes this sounds exactly like her. It's a classic Otome game character type, usually talkative, but secretly strong due to a tragic past, and desperate when his crush is in trouble. And most fortunately, it's a character type that does not exist in royal lovers. A playboy who is actually a knight, or a knight who is such a playboy. The possibilities are endless, and it's a character she can probably pull off. And so, on that day, at 14 years old, Elizabeth Burton decided what she wanted to become. She had two reasons for bringing His Highness out with her. The first was to show him the state of the town, a duty for a future ruler, but this was not her real reason. In the game, he has a secret date in town, event where his childish excitement makes the player's heart flutter. Her real reason is to jeopardize that future event with the heroine by getting rid of his first time in town. When a shopkeeper asks who the young man is, she explains he's a knight apprentice interested in patrol duties. The shopkeeper offers Edward some bread to build up his strength to become a splendid knight. The man offers some to Elizabeth as well, complimenting the deep purple jam by comparing it to his wife's eyes. When Edward hesitates to eat, she teases him, offering to take it if he doesn't want it, and he retorts that he didn't say he wouldn't eat it. She remembers that royalty only eats food that has been tested for poison, a precaution her own fiancé, Robert, seems to ignore. Edward suddenly takes a bite out of the bread she is holding. He licks a bit of jam from her glove, leaving her stunned and blushing. Winking, he thanks her for the food, and she yells at him, flustered, that she told him she would eat it. He calmly retorts that he just has a better metabolism, causing her to choke in anger. As the townspeople worry that he's choked, one woman tells Elizabeth to look after him properly. A woman offers him a cup of tea, but Elizabeth takes it first, testing for poison, before he can drink it. The woman smiles, relieved as Elizabeth finishes the drink. Edward then asks the woman for a cup of tea for himself. The woman happily obliges, telling him he didn't get a good taste earlier. He takes the cup, looks at Elizabeth, and asks if she needs to test for poison again. He then takes a drink and thanks her very much. As they leave, showered with gifts from the townspeople, he remarks that she is loved by them. She tells him that they are only treating him generously because he is with her. He muses that this kindness is different from the respect people in the palace show his father, which is born of status. He realizes he has been too sensitive and that doubting their kindness is foolish behavior. Elizabeth notes that her second objective for bringing him along has been successfully accomplished. With his strange paranoia cured, she hopes she will no longer have to hear his gloomy sighs. They are then approached by a little girl with a flower hair clip. The girl, Ray, who got lost the other day, cheerfully reports that it was her mom who was lost, not her. The girl asks who Edward is, and Elizabeth hesitates to reveal his identity, while Edward tells the girl that cheating is wrong. Ray ignores him and declares that when she grows up, she is going to marry Night-sama. Elizabeth is momentarily speechless. She is thrilled to have finally made someone say this line and, patting the girl's head, agrees to go shopping with her. The girl's guard says he will accompany them. They enter a handicrafts store. The girl's mother is looking for materials to make a new dress for her daughter. A beautiful piece of lace catches Edward's eye. The shopkeeper explains that it's crocheted lace and that he has a face that would suit it, like a beautiful girl. She tells him the pattern is suited for beginners and would be easy to learn with a little practice. He continues to gaze at the intricate lace, a new thought taking root. This quiet, delicate craft is a world away from the pressures of the throne. He imagines the simple act of creating something beautiful with his own hands. For a moment, the weight of his royal duties and his grim diagnosis seems to lift. A small, almost imperceptible smile touches his lips as he contemplates the new possibility. The bustling shop fades into the background as he remains lost in thought. Elizabeth watches him, sensing a subtle but profound shift in the tragic prince. Perhaps this small detour was more significant than she had planned. He has found a flicker of personal interest outside his cursed fate. The sunlight streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing around the delicate lace. His expression is softer now, less burdened than she has ever seen it. He has been shown a world beyond the castle walls, full of simple kindness and new hobbies. The seed of a different future, one not defined by his illness, has been planted. The silence stretches, comfortable and contemplative. He gently touches the lace, a sense of wonder in his eyes. The weight of the crown seems a little lighter in this moment. The young girl and her mother continue their shopping, unaware of the prince's quiet epiphany. Elizabeth feels a sense of accomplishment, having achieved more than she set out to do. The day's patrol has changed something fundamental in the Crown Prince. His path forward is still uncertain, but it is no longer shrouded in complete darkness. He looks up from the lace, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's across the shop. A silent understanding passes between them. The Playboy Knight has managed to do more than just ruin a future game event. She has given a hopeless prince a reason to look beyond his own tragedy. The afternoon light softens as their patrol together comes to a close. A new chapter for the Crown Prince has quietly begun. And Elizabeth's own path as a capture target has become much clearer. Her unexpected kindness has started to change the story for everyone. As spring arrives, 13-year-old Elizabeth Burton takes another step toward her goal of becoming a capture target. Though training with the instructors has made her stronger, she still feels something important is missing and decides to participate in the patrols. Believing actual combat experience is what she needs, she makes a request to the instructors. This leads her to be summoned by Crown Prince Edward, the older half-brother of her fiancé Robert and the first in line to the throne. She kneels before him, a nasty shock to be summoned, and inwardly wishes he hadn't, though he tells her to rise. He smoothly compliments her, remarking that his silly brother has praised her skills quite a bit. She offers to accommodate him at the training grounds, but he declines, stating he is against such brutish activities. He explains that unlike his brother, he is not obsessed with swordsmanship and that it is enough to fulfill the bare minimum expected of a royal. He claims his natural talent is both a gift and a curse, and that he envies his brother's ability to devote himself so completely to one thing. She is unsure if he is bragging or if her own mind is just twisted, as she had assumed he wanted guidance in swordsmanship. When he dismisses her, saying that meeting her was all he wanted, she is so annoyed she can barely ask to be excused. As she leaves, she grips her fist, thinking that if he were not royalty, she would have sent him flying for wasting her time. Putting the irritating encounter in the past, she leaves for her patrol, later returning to her brothers for tea. She tells Christopher that the patrol was fun and that she learned a great deal. The first lesson was that the town looks exactly like the computer graphics from the game, a sight that deeply moved her. It felt like an otaku pilgrimage, visiting the real-life locations of the game's key events for each of the capture targets. The second lesson was the reaction of the townspeople, as young ladies and even older women were completely charmed by the cool and youthful knight. Her knight persona is proving extremely effective, and though Christopher wants to join, she must tell him it's not possible. He excitedly declares that he'll become a knight trainee too, asking if she would let him go with her then. She agrees to ask the instructors but tells him he must get their father's permission himself, a challenge he happily accepts. And so, while she continued to impress the regulars on patrol by incapacitating drunkards with a stranglehold, their father eventually relented to Christopher's earnest request to become a trainee. With her duties as an instructor and on patrol, her days became busy and fulfilling, yet a small issue continued to trouble her. She was still undecided about the final personality trait she needed to add to her knight persona. Though she was doing well, she felt she was less handsome than the other capture targets and lacked their interesting traits, so she decided against a niche personality like Drill Sergeant, for now. She reviewed the others in her mind: Robert's simple-mindedness, Isaac's seriousness, Christopher's trauma, and Edward's depressing negativity. They all had a hidden side. She realizes she needs an unexpected side too, just as she spots a man approaching her. The man is one of the Crown Prince's personal guards, who informs her that His Highness requests her presence once more. She finds herself again in the presence of Prince Edward. Edward explains that Robert had boastfully told him all about his captain and the West training, a story Elizabeth can practically see unfolding. Through this conversation, Edward began to realize how simple-minded his brother was, and that this was likely the first time Robert's inferiority complex had allowed him to speak so openly to his older brother. This leads Edward to a startling suspicion, and he asks her if it's possible that Robert is completely unaware that his captain is also his fiancée, Elizabeth Burton. She sighs and closes her eyes, admitting that in all likelihood, that is the case. Edward is exasperated, asking how she can be completely fine with her own fiancé not recognizing her. He points out that their strange relationship is precisely why rumors of them being on bad terms are circulating. She feigns ignorance about any rumors and flatly states that she has no intention of ever becoming queen. She immediately realizes she's made a leading statement and sees Edward peeking at her, clearly itching for her to ask him to elaborate. Wanting to escape the painful conversation, she says that Christopher is waiting for her and makes to excuse herself. He allows her to leave, but as she walks away, he is left looking completely dazed. She later reflects that she is not a patient person and is not good at listening to people's troubles. Sometime later, now 14 years old, she is summoned once more by Prince Edward. Her life has become much busier with studying for the academy in addition to her other duties, and she has no time to cater to the whims of the prince. He asks her to think of Robert, and she wonders what he means, wishing she could just go home. He then asks her directly if she thinks Robert is suited to being king. She tries to give a diplomatic answer, stating Robert has no plans for the throne and that he, Edward, will surely be king, but he calls her remark disrespectful. Edward then looks at her with a grave expression and declares that he will never be king. Her attempt to wrap things up quickly has backfired spectacularly, as he reveals that doctors have only given him 2 to 3 years to live. She understands his insecure behavior now. His impending death is a national secret, and he's playing the victim, haunted by the political maneuvering it will cause. She wants to tell him not to worry, because she has a crucial piece of information he lacks. She realizes that if she gives him the spoiler, then he won't die, metaphorically speaking. She knows from the game that he is saved in both his own route and Robert's, either by the heroine's saintly power or by surgery in a neighboring country. Even though he won't actually die, the pressure is on her. If she does nothing, her engagement will be broken, and she'll be ruined. She reminds herself that the main character of this story is the romance heroine, and he is just one of many capture targets. She tells him that she never would have thought he was sick and that he displayed great moves in the match, regardless of how he feels about it. She then remembers that she is short-tempered and has a terrible personality. Elizabeth Burton is, after all, just a villainess, no better than an extra. She decides to break the nose of this capture target who thinks he's the main character of a tragedy and offers to show His Highness around the castle. She surprises him by producing her cadet uniform, which she notes should fit him, and tells him she will return for him in the morning. She gives him a confident smile and says, "See you." He stammers, threatening to call the guards, but she warns him not to do anything that will get her caught. She tells him this is the best way for her, leaving him to wonder how in the world she plans to get him out. Climbing up to his third-floor balcony with ease, she tells the shocked Edward that most knights can climb walls these days. He threatens to call the guards, noting it's not just her head that would be chopped, but she points out that since he's changed clothes, he clearly has no intention of doing so. When he asks how they will get down from the third floor, she dismisses his idea of using bedsheets as a rope. She tells him with a straight face that they can simply jump down. Before he can protest, she excuses herself and lifts him into her arms. As she steps onto the railing, she warns him he might bite his tongue, leaving him to curse her as they leap from the window. They descend rapidly from the third-story window into the garden below. They land safely with a soft thud, leaving the prince stunned, blushing, and speechless. He asks if she plans to return him to his room already. She grabs a horse, and he begins to protest, talking nonsense about her stopping what she's doing. He points out how weird it is for him, the crown prince, to be sitting in front of her on the horse. She dismisses his concerns about his safety if something happens, winks, and tells him to just let her escort him. As they ride through town together, a woman calls out, "Knight-sama," in admiration. She playfully engages with the crowd, calling them beautiful kittens and soaking in their adoration. Edward stares at her, asking if she isn't a knight, and despite her rank, isn't she acting more like a playboy? The word, playboy, hits her with the force of an explosion. A playboy knight, a frivolous sweet-talker who is kind to all the girls. She realizes this sounds exactly like a perfect character archetype for her. It's a classic otome game character type, usually talkative, but secretly strong due to a tragic past, and desperate when his crush is in trouble. And most fortunately, it's a character type that does not exist in the world of royal lovers. A playboy who is actually a knight, or a knight who is such a playboy. The possibilities are endless, and it's a character she can probably pull off. And so, on that day, at 14 years old, Elizabeth Burton smiled, having finally decided what she wanted to become. She had two reasons for bringing His Highness out with her into the town. The first was to show him the state of the town, a duty for a future ruler, but this was not her real reason for bringing him along. In the game, he has a secret date in town, event where his childish excitement over the smallest things makes the player's heart flutter. Her real reason is to jeopardize that future event with the heroine by getting rid of his first time experiencing the town with her instead. When a shopkeeper asks who the young man is, she explains he's a knight apprentice interested in patrol duties. The shopkeeper offers Edward some bread to build up his strength to become a splendid knight. The man offers some to Elizabeth as well, complimenting the deep purple jam by comparing it to his wife's eyes. When Edward hesitates to eat, she teases him, offering to take it if he doesn't want it, and he retorts that he didn't say he wouldn't eat it. She remembers that royalty only eats food that has been tested for poison, a precaution her own fiancé, Robert, seems to care little about. Edward suddenly takes a bite out of the bread she is holding in her hand. He then licks a bit of jam from her glove, leaving her completely stunned and blushing. Winking, he thanks her for the food, and she yells at him, flustered, that she told him she would eat it. He calmly retorts that he just has a better metabolism than her, which causes her to choke in anger. As the townspeople worry that he's choked on the bread, one woman tells Elizabeth to look after him properly. A woman offers him a cup of tea, but Elizabeth takes it first, testing for poison, before he can drink it. The woman smiles, relieved, as Elizabeth finishes the drink without issue. Edward then politely asks the woman for a cup of tea for himself, as his was just taken. The woman happily obliges, telling him he didn't get a good taste of it earlier and pouring him more. He takes the cup, looks at Elizabeth, and asks with a straight face if she needs to test this one for poison again. He then takes a drink and thanks her very much, a small smile playing on his lips. As they leave, showered with gifts from the townspeople, he remarks that she is truly loved by them. She tells him that they are only treating him generously because he is with her. He muses that this kindness is different from the respect people in the palace show his father, which is based on status. He realizes he has been too sensitive and that doubting the townspeople's simple kindness is foolish behavior on his part. Elizabeth notes that her second objective for bringing him along, curing his paranoia, seems to have been successfully accomplished. With that, she is happy that she should no longer have to hear his gloomy sighs anymore. They are then approached by a little girl with a flower hair clip, who gives Elizabeth a hug. The girl, Ray, who got lost the other day, cheerfully reports that it was her mom who was lost, not her. The girl asks who Edward is, and Elizabeth hesitates to reveal his identity, while Edward tells the girl that cheating is wrong. Ray ignores him completely and declares that when she grows up, she is going to marry Knight-sama. Elizabeth is momentarily stunned speechless by the girl's declaration. She is thrilled to have finally made someone say this iconic line and, patting the girl's head, agrees to go shopping with her. The girl's guard says he will accompany them on their shopping trip. They enter a handicrafts store at the girl's request. The girl's mother is looking for materials to make a new Western-style dress for her daughter. A beautiful and intricate piece of lace catches Edward's eye. The shopkeeper explains that it's crocheted lace and remarks that he has a face that would suit it, like a beautiful girl. She tells him the pattern is suited for beginners and would be easy to learn with a little practice. He continues to gaze at the delicate, handcrafted item, a new thought taking root. This quiet, gentle craft is a world away from the pressures of the throne and the constant shadow of his illness. He imagines the simple act of creating something beautiful with his own hands, a concept foreign to him. For a moment, the weight of his royal duties and his grim diagnosis seems to lift from his shoulders. A small, almost imperceptible smile touches his lips as he contemplates this new and unexpected possibility. The bustling sounds of the shop fade into the background as he remains lost in his thoughts. Elizabeth watches him from the side, sensing a subtle but profound shift in the tragic prince. Perhaps this small detour into the town was more significant than she had originally planned. He has found a flicker of personal interest, a potential hobby completely outside his cursed and predetermined fate. The afternoon sunlight streams through the shop window, illuminating the dust motes dancing around the delicate lace. His expression is softer now, less burdened than she has ever seen it before. He has been shown a world beyond the cold castle walls, a world full of simple kindness and new hobbies to explore. The seed of a different future, one not entirely defined by his illness or his royal title, has been planted. The silence between them stretches, comfortable and contemplative, a shared, unspoken moment. He gently touches the lace, a sense of quiet wonder reflected in his eyes. The immense weight of the crown seems a little lighter in this small, ordinary handicrafts store. The young girl and her mother continue their shopping, completely unaware of the prince's quiet epiphany. Elizabeth feels a deep sense of accomplishment, having achieved more than she ever set out to do that day. The day's patrol has changed something fundamental within the crown prince, setting him on a new path. Elizabeth smiles while holding a box filled with her creations, presenting herself before the royal castle. The box is overflowing with handmade crafts, including knitted stuffed animals and decorative ribbons, which she offers as a gift. Prince Edward accepts a knitted bear but questions the sheer volume of the items. As Elizabeth explains, she ran out of room for them all. He grimly interprets the gesture as another dramatic ploy related to his supposed short lifespan, telling her to consider them a keepsake. With firm resolve, Elizabeth stares back at him and declares that she refuses to believe he has little time left to live. Edward stares at her, intrigued by her disrespectful confidence, and says he is interested to see how she plans to ensure he lives. She coolly replies that it is simply her personality, and if believing in his long life is disrespectful, he is free to punish her. Her bold response flusters the prince, but she follows it with a charming smile, stating he is the only one with whom she can share her secrets. He finds it increasingly difficult to refuse her, suggesting she give the numerous handmade items to the maids instead. Elizabeth notes that the items are of high enough quality to be sold, and Edward agrees, not wanting them to be misunderstood as a personal gift from him. Pointing out the limited display space he has, she cleverly proposes that she buy the items from him before giving them away to others. After a moment of consideration, the prince sees the logic in her plan and agrees to the arrangement. With his consent secured, the scene shifts to the Burton estate where she will distribute the prince's crafts. Elizabeth presents the box to the head maid, cheerfully announcing that they are gifts to be shared among the staff. Her playboy persona immediately causes a misunderstanding, as the stern head maid suspiciously questions her motives for giving gifts to the girls. The head maid inspects the items closely, her expression sharp as she correctly deduces that the gifts are handmade. She points out the telltale signs of a hobbyist's work, such as inefficient stitching and the great care put into each piece, unlike mass-produced goods. The maid's intensity grows as she demands to know who made them, while Elizabeth panics internally, knowing the truth about the crown prince would shock her. The head maid then speaks softly, reminding Elizabeth that she has served the family since before her birth and has always watched over her. She confesses that while her words may have been harsh, her only desire is to see Elizabeth happy and enjoying her life with a smile. Elizabeth is deeply moved by the maid's heartfelt words, her eyes welling up with tears. The tender moment shatters as the maid grabs her, furiously scolding her for toying with women's feelings and warning that such behavior will lead to her ruin. Completely blindsided, Elizabeth tries to protest this massive misunderstanding of her intentions. She is horrified that the maid believes she would casually redistribute heartfelt gifts from other young ladies, thinking it the worst possible conclusion. After a long and difficult explanation, the head maid finally understands the situation but insists Elizabeth keep at least one of the items for herself. Now in her room, Elizabeth reluctantly places a knitted bear on a shelf, admitting she isn't good at decorating, just as her eyes meet someone else's. A voice calls her name, and she internally resigns herself to keeping the bear, seeing it as a better alternative to storing bags. Prince Edward stands in her doorway, looking cheerful as she questions why he isn't in class. He explains his exemption from self-defense class gave him free time, and that his presence is a coincidence as he was just leaving for student council business. As Elizabeth begins to respond, she is cut short by a sudden movement from the prince. Edward stumbles forward, collapsing against her with a surprised grunt. He quickly apologizes, blaming a sudden bout of dizziness for his clumsiness while Elizabeth looks on with concern. She realizes the situation is bad, as a crowd of female students has gathered, excitedly watching what they perceive as a close moment between her and the crown prince. The scene pauses on the implication of their public closeness. A spark of understanding flashes in Elizabeth's eyes. She recognizes the familiar thrill the girls are experiencing from seeing two handsome boys in an intimate moment. It is a moment of cultural insight for her, realizing that the hearts of young women are the same regardless of the world they inhabit. Their moment is interrupted by another student who advises her not to overdo it, while Edward gently insists she go to the sickbay to be safe. Before she can protest, Edward sweeps her up into his arms, declaring he will carry her there himself. He correctly guesses she would not have gone on her own, chiding her for pushing herself too hard while she flushes with embarrassment. While being carried through the corridor amidst the swooning students, she yells at him to practice what he preaches and take better care of his own health. They arrive at an empty sickbay, where Edward notes the doctor is currently absent. He tucks her into a bed, lecturing that overwork is poison, but she protests that she still has duties to attend to. He asks directly if she is worried about him, and she hesitantly concedes that it is a possibility. She clarifies that any loyal subject would be concerned for the crown prince, asking if he wants to be treated like the sick person he claims to be but rarely acts like. Sensing his mood, she begins to tease him, reminding him that a truly sick person wouldn't be able to go out on the town or shop for craft supplies. Her words hit their mark, and a blushing Prince Edward turns away, muttering that this is all her fault. Elizabeth watches his reaction with a knowing look. She silently wonders if his flushed face is a sign of a genuine fever as he complains that her strangeness is what led to this situation. With a smile, she tells him to rest well before promising to serve him again once he is back to his usual self. As she leaves, she sees the doctor has returned and is standing in the hallway. The chapter concludes, marking a transition in the story. The doctor thanks Burton-san for her help but gently chastises her, noting that it's improper for a girl to be alone with a male patient. He tries to explain the misunderstanding, but Elizabeth, still playing her male role, remains completely oblivious. A narrator explains that as summer break began, Elizabeth divided her time between relaxing with family and working her part-time patrol job. The cityscape stretches out below as she reflects on how good it feels to be outside and active. She enjoys a snack while on her watch. An energetic Prince Robert suddenly appears, running up to her and happily calling out, "Captain!" He excitedly recounts how he and a friend apprehended criminals who were attacking an old man, turning them over to the knights. He finishes his proud tale with a flourish. Elizabeth sighs with pity for the royal guards, realizing from the background that the attack was a setup and Robert was the true target. She sharply scolds a surprised Robert, warning him against being overconfident in his abilities. Continuing her lecture, she reminds him that the real world is dangerous and unlike their training exercises. She explains that the correct, safer procedure would have been to alert the patrol, but Robert insists he couldn't ignore someone in trouble. She accuses him of acting recklessly out of a selfish desire to be a hero, forcing him to realize he put others at risk. Internally, she admits her words are harsh but necessary, as Robert's interference threatens her precious position on the patrol. The dejected trainees, led by Robert, turn to leave. From the crowd, a man glares at the departing group with dangerous intent. Elizabeth's instincts scream of danger, and she shouts for Robert to get out of the way. She moves in a flash to intercept the threat. Shoving Robert to safety, she takes the brunt of an attack, a knife pressed against her side by a hidden assailant. The only sound is the faint whisper of her title, "Captain." Robert cries out in horror while his companions try to pull him away from the danger, but Elizabeth gives a subtle wink. She quickly assesses the situation. The attacker is an associate of the men Robert caught, but he is frozen, unable to press his attack. The assailant finds himself completely immobilized, and Elizabeth internally gloats that her trained abdominal muscles have rendered his knife useless. Her fellow patrollers seize the opportunity, swarming and capturing the stunned attacker. As the trainees rush to Robert's side, Elizabeth deduces the attack was orchestrated by a noble who opposes the second prince. Robert worries that she's been injured protecting him, but she coolly reassures him that she's fine, though anyone else would have been hurt. To prove her point, she lifts her shirt to reveal her muscular abdomen, crediting her survival to her training while reminding him his actions created this danger. She explains the entire incident, including the fake elderly man, was a trap designed from the start to target him, the second prince. Looking him in the eye, she tells him he is still a child, and it is better to learn from failure now while she is there to correct him. She softens her tone and pats his head, instructing him to remember this lesson and act with more caution. A humbled Robert can only respond with a quiet agreement. Returning to the palace, Elizabeth narrates that the day's events had become quite significant. Speaking with Prince Edward, she expresses her relief that his brother is safe. Edward finds her story of blocking a knife with her abs hard to believe, and flatly refuses her offer to show him. She insists she deserves some praise for saving a royal, mentioning her family's panicked reaction before Edward informs her the king wishes to grant her an award. He clarifies that since Robert was out secretly, the incident must remain private, so the official medal is out of the question. Edward observes that she seems to lack any interest in gaining status or fame from her heroic deed. Internally, Elizabeth admits she is materialistic and wants all of those things, but holds her tongue for fear of damaging her reputation. Seeing an opportunity, she tells the prince that she does have one request to make. She formally asks Prince Edward to have her engagement to his brother, Prince Robert, be annulled. The request leaves Prince Edward wide-eyed with shock. He questions her motive, thinking she was interested in Robert, but she clarifies their relationship is strictly professional. His gaze turns serious as he asks if there is another man she wishes to marry. She denies having another suitor, arguing that she is simply unsuited for the role of a royal consort and that a better match must be found for the good of the country. She then adds a surprising declaration, stating that she feels she is destined to fall in love with her soulmate very soon. A moment later, she becomes flustered, admitting the romantic confession feels out of character for her. She awkwardly explains that despite her appearance, she is a true romantic at heart. Edward listens to her strange confession in contemplative silence. With a sigh, he agrees to speak with his father regarding her request to end the engagement. Elizabeth bows deeply, offering her sincere thanks for his help. The two share a final, long and unreadable look. Elizabeth privately considers that the prince's known love for delicate handicrafts might mean he also has a romantic side, a fact she finds lucky for her plans. Her true thoughts are a plea for him to stay out of her way so she can pursue her fated love affair with the game's heroine. A classroom door bursts open as a voice bellows out, demanding to know if Elizabeth Barton is present. Inside the quiet room, a composed, blonde-haired young man in a uniform adjusts his collar while his classmates turn toward the commotion. A spiky-haired man named Roberto stands impatiently, wondering aloud why he must escort his fiancée to the upcoming school dance party, which serves as a social debut practice for the students. The rules for the event are strict. Those with fiancés must act as their escorts, and for an engaged young lady to attend alone is a social disgrace that would destroy her reputation. A memory reveals that in the original game's story, Roberto had deliberately refused to be his fiancée's escort precisely to cause her this public humiliation. The blonde youth, who is Elizabeth, realizes that Roberto has been pressured by his peers into finding his fiancée before the game's official story has even started, and so he speaks up to identify himself. Roberto's search is interrupted when a subordinate suddenly appears, saluting and loudly addressing him as Captain, forcing Roberto to awkwardly clarify that he is looking for Elizabeth Barton. Believing his search to be a failure, Roberto wonders if Elizabeth is absent for the day, only for the blonde youth to stand with his arms crossed and calmly state that he is the one Roberto seeks. Placing a hand on his own chest, the youth declares unequivocally that he is Elizabeth Barton, Roberto's fiancée. Roberto takes in this shocking revelation with a blank, placid smile. The smile is instantly replaced by an expression of pure, sweat-drenched horror and confusion as the reality of the statement sinks in. Roberto stammers, asking if it's all a joke, but Elizabeth coolly retorts, asking if he looks like someone who would make such a claim in jest before demanding to know Roberto's affiliation. The crushing weight of the truth causes Roberto to drop to the floor, prostrating himself in a deep, formal apology. As another student mocks Roberto's utter cluelessness and worries for the country's future, Elizabeth grabs the stunned man by his collar and hauls him to his feet. Leaning in close, Elizabeth whispers a harsh reprimand, pointing out that his earlier behavior was not befitting a gentleman asking a lady for an escort and questioning his adherence to the knight's code. He shoves Roberto away, calling him an amateur and declaring that it will be 100 years before someone like him is worthy of being his escort. Later, Elizabeth walks down the hallway with his hands behind his head, sighing about the afternoon classes that await him now that the confrontation is over. A narrative note explains that Roberto fainted in the classroom, was sent home early, and has been absent since due to a high fever, which Elizabeth suspects was caused by the sheer shock of the revelation. Elizabeth's thoughts drift to the approaching dance party, an event he'd completely forgotten about due to being busy, but whose date is now drawing near. He idly remembers joking with his friend Isaac about dancing for fun, but realizes he must now seriously consider who to ask, just as he is addressed by a new group of people. Standing before him are 5 female students who introduce themselves as the executive members of the Barton-sama fan club. The girls bow deeply, with their representative explaining that they wish to request that he invite someone from outside their club to be his dance partner, which leaves Elizabeth wondering why. With a sincere expression, the lead girl clarifies that their request is intended to prevent unnecessary conflict from breaking out within their ranks. She explains that the club members are happy to admire him from a distance, but they fear that if he were to choose only one of them, it would inevitably create jealousy and resentment among the others. Elizabeth agrees that avoiding conflict is wise, thinking privately that the special first dance should be reserved for the story's future protagonist, before offering a counterproposal, that he dance with every single club member. In response, he is presented with the club's membership roster, a towering stack of papers that causes him to recoil, realizing the only way to dance with that many people would be to lead a folk dance. He notices several male students' names on the list, and the representative explains their fan club is not constrained by something as trivial as gender, before reiterating her plea for him to choose a non-member. With a warm smile, Elizabeth accepts their request, saying he wants them all to get along and reminding them that he doesn't belong to any one person. The fan club girls are overjoyed, thanking him profusely for his kindness, while Elizabeth reflects internally that he is not a kind person at all. On the day of the party, Elizabeth stands alone, contemplating his true motivation for agreeing. He simply decided it would make for a more compelling otome game story if the hero who treated all girls equally finally singled out one special girl to receive his attention. A low buzz of conversation fills the grand hall as elegantly dressed guests turn their attention toward the doorway, sensing a stir. The crowd's focus sharpens on 3 individuals standing together, each adorned in an elaborate gown that makes them the undeniable center of attention. A young man with light hair and a military uniform freezes in place, his eyes wide and a sheen of nervous sweat on his brow as he stammers in confusion. The trio is revealed to be 3 men in women's attire. One looks severe behind his glasses, another flashes a confident, charming smile, and the third appears deeply uncomfortable. Guests whisper to one another about a possible costume party as the uniformed man approaches one of the men in dresses, his expression serious as he begins to speak. He admits that he did not realize his captain was Elizabeth Burton, explaining that if he had known, he would have acted differently, a realization that hits him with sudden clarity. The captain, in turn, reflects on his own shortcomings, thinking that to change one's attitude based on the other person is unbecoming of a gentleman or a knight, and that he is still just as arrogant as he ever was. The uniformed man's expression softens into a slight smile, a new idea visibly taking shape in his mind. He then declares that instead of being the escort, he will be the one who is escorted this evening. A second man in a dress winks playfully, explaining he saw his foolish younger brother doing something amusing and decided to join in, proposing that if the goal is to keep the captain from being alone, then he could be the one escorted instead. The captain inwardly questions the crown prince's sanity and the fate of the nation, while the prince openly admires how beautiful he looks in his gown. Seeking an anchor of reason, the captain looks toward the third man, Isaac, hoping he can explain the bizarre situation, even as the prince insists that the chance to escort him is a rare privilege. Isaac, however, calmly states that he has not yet mastered the male's dancing part and therefore requires the captain's cooperation to attend the party. He firmly reminds the captain that they had made a promise to dance together, a statement that makes the captain stare back in wide-eyed disbelief. The captain is stunned, trying and failing to remember making such a promise and starting to wonder if this whole disastrous scene is somehow his fault. Isaac doesn't relent, recalling their conversation where they decided that since neither had an escort, they would just dance together as they usually do. It dawns on the captain that Isaac took a joke so seriously that he came in full drag, a vulnerability the crown prince immediately seizes upon, calling it pathetic to cling to such a faint hope. The prince and Isaac trade sharp words, with Isaac arguing it is better than not being invited at all, while the prince confidently asserts that he will be asked to dance soon enough. Suddenly, the uniformed man cuts through their argument, announcing to them both that the captain is his fiancée. Now the subject of an intense three-way dispute, the uniformed man feels completely left out of a conversation that is supposed to be about him. All three men turn their pleas to the captain. The young man asks for a chance, the prince demands a dance, and Isaac insists he is needed as a partner, leaving the captain cornered and overwhelmed. He stumbles back, wishing he had simply asked any other lady to be his escort and wanting only to go home, calling out in desperation for his older sister. As if summoned, a young woman appears, demanding to know what Christopher is doing in that outfit and revealing she chased after him with a proper dress just in case. A relieved Christopher agrees to leave at once, and his sister grabs his arm to lead him away toward a waiting carriage, brushing off his confused questions. Minutes later, Christopher stands mortified in a frilly gown, his face flushed and his eyes wet with tears, as his younger brother stands behind him, comforting his now crying sister. His sister sobs that she must now act as his escort and cannot attend the ball, but her brother tries to console her by saying their older brother will find her a partner, only for her to weep that he doesn't have a fiancée either. Since the dance party ended, Christopher has been sulking, and Lizzie pleads for him to get over his bad mood. His brother insists that this time, it is Lizzie who is at fault, while another brother begs Lizzie for forgiveness, but Christopher remains silent and unmoved. In a sudden, desperate move, Lizzie turns to her younger brother and asks him to cut her hair, leaving him utterly shocked. She insists on a haircut that he would consider manly, but he protests, telling her she is a fine boy without cutting her hair and looked cute in the dress and ribbons. Lizzie shouts with tearful frustration that she hates being seen that way, which is precisely why she needs the change. With her hair now cut short, it is revealed that her older brother, worried she might do something drastic, had arranged for a professional hairdresser. Her younger brother compliments the new style, telling Christopher he looks very cool. Lizzie muses that Christopher is at the age where being called cool is more desirable than cute, and decides to praise him that way from now on, though her own request to trim her hair shorter is immediately denied. Sometime later, with the dance party now a memory, Christopher and his brother are seen jogging on a path. The air has taken on the color of winter, and Lizzie stands before a large building, wiping her face as she calls out her own name. Panic erupts as a man realizes Christopher has vanished, a fear mirrored in Lizzie's horrified expression. The man explains to Lizzie that he and Christopher attended a meeting at the royal castle, where Christopher acted strangely before they separated so the man could report to the crown prince. He recounts how Christopher told the carriage driver he had an errand and to return without him, apparently going back into the castle grounds. Lizzie finds this deeply suspicious, as Christopher has no acquaintances or business to attend to at the royal castle. The man had assumed Christopher might wander the town before returning home, but he never did. When asked for any leads, the man hesitantly suggests, without proof, a connection to Earl Wilson, Christopher's blood relative, who was present at the same meeting. Lizzie understands that as nobles, they cannot act on suspicion alone, as it would needlessly create conflict with another powerful house. Another person suddenly stands, declaring that handling such matters is their responsibility, startling Lizzie. Her brother voices his concern that she might rashly storm the Wilson estate, to which Lizzie jokingly replies that it sounds like a good plan before admitting she's not serious. Lizzie instructs her brother to wait at home, holding out hope that Christopher might simply return on his own. She tells him she will go to the knight's garrison and request that they organize an official search. The narrative reveals her brother was too overwrought with worry to see through her obvious lie. Lizzie is shown moving across rooftops, having identified the Wilson estate's location to the east of the castle and making her way there directly. A stark message appears: Christopher has been taken back to the house where he was born. His backstory is revealed. His father died in a carriage accident soon after his birth, and his mother later abandoned him at the house that became the Wilson earldom. Though Christopher was the rightful heir, his father's younger brother took over the house and initially cared for the boy, but that changed when it became clear he bore no resemblance to his deceased father. Suspected of infidelity due to Christopher's different appearance, his mother and he were ostracized and lived in near confinement within the estate. Under constant scorn, his mother's love for him eventually faded, and she ran off with a servant, leaving him behind, as Lizzie leaps toward a distant church tower. In the original game story, Christopher is unloved until the female protagonist appears and shows him affection. The Wilson family then plots to reclaim Christopher to get close to the protagonist and her saintly powers, but her innocent encouragement for reconciliation makes Christopher feel betrayed, destroying his ability to trust. Leaping through the air, Lizzie is filled with resolve, certain that if this world's Christopher is also being targeted for exploitation by the Earl, she must be the one to save him. She surmises the Earl likely threatened Christopher, perhaps claiming the Burton ducal family would cast him out if they knew he wasn't of their blood, all to gain leverage. Having successfully navigated the rooftops as a shortcut, Lizzie lands and prepares for her next move. She spots the confinement tower and sees a lone figure inside just as she smashes through a lower window with a loud crash. Holding the broken window frame, Lizzie smiles down from her entry point and cheerfully greets Christopher. Christopher stares up in utter disbelief as Lizzie tells him it's time to go home, because his older brother is worried sick. Inside the stone tower, Christopher sits on the floor and looks up at Lizzie, explaining that even though she came for him, he feels he has failed. Tears stream down his face as he confesses that he believes he is unworthy of being her brother. Lizzie watches her distraught younger brother with a sigh, a look of fond exasperation on her face. She reaches down and gently places a hand on his head, ruffling his hair. Effortlessly, she lifts him into her arms, declaring that he is her brother simply because she says so, and remarks on how big he has gotten. She comments that he is still as light as a feather, prompting Christopher to ask if she remembers the day she and their older brother came to welcome him into their family. He admits that ever since that moment, his one desire has been to become just like her. A bright, genuine smile breaks through his tears as he declares that she is the admirable knight he has always looked up to. Touched, Lizzie thinks that being admired by her younger brother is the greatest honor a sister could ask for, and tells him it's time to go home. With Christopher held securely in her arms, she carries him out of the tower and across the rooftops of the estate. She lands softly at the estate's main gate, setting Christopher down just as their older brother arrives with a contingent of men. There, Earl Wilson scoffs, telling the next duke that suspecting others without proof is hardly befitting of his family's esteemed reputation. The brother, though acknowledging his rudeness, presses the Earl for any information he might have about Christopher's whereabouts. The Earl dismissively asks what any of this has to do with his recent financial dealings, which he insists are legitimate business ventures. Unfazed, the brother lays out the facts. The Earl's primary trade in textiles from the East has collapsed, and he has taken on massive, potentially ruinous bank loans. The Earl angrily demands to know what his private affairs have to do with this intrusive visit and asks for any shred of evidence connecting him to the missing boy. Though the information presented doesn't form a direct link, it paints a damning picture that allows everyone present to draw their own conclusions. The brother lowers his voice, pleading with the Earl to make the right choice while he still wishes to believe in his innocence, for the sake of his precious brother. He then delivers a clear ultimatum. If anything should happen, the Burton family will be forced to recognize the Wilsons as an enemy. Reminding the Earl what it means to be an enemy of the powerful Burton family, he asks one last time for information, only to be interrupted by a sudden shout. Christopher runs toward them, calling out to his brother, whose face registers shock and immense relief. He rushes to Christopher and embraces him tightly, overjoyed that he is safe, while Christopher apologizes for causing so much worry. Christopher quickly explains that Earl Wilson threatened to expose his parentage, promising to keep it a secret only if Christopher cooperated in a scheme to secure loans. As she listens, Lizzie realizes with cold certainty that the events are unfolding just as they did in the game. His older brother holds Christopher close, assuring him that his lineage doesn't matter to him, Lizzie, or their parents in the slightest. He looks his younger brother in the eyes and tells him firmly that he is Christopher Burton, the treasured second son of the ducal house, and he must never mistake that fact. The Earl immediately changes his tune, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and that Christopher had begged to be brought back to the Wilson estate to reclaim his title. Christopher vehemently denies this, shouting that he was brought by force and locked away, but the Earl insists he was treated as an honored guest. The older brother turns his gaze from the frantic Earl and calmly calls out to Lizzie. He coolly posits a scenario where his brother happened to drop a cufflink, and the location where that cufflink was found would logically be the place where he was being held. Lizzie picks up the cue, pointing to the tall tower on the estate grounds and asking about its purpose, casually suggesting it looks like a building for imprisonment, all while knowing she planted the evidence there herself. As the Earl continues to sputter denials, Lizzie points out that taking a minor from his home without a guardian's permission is highly irregular and could easily be mistaken for kidnapping. The Earl desperately spins a new tale, claiming he was framed after he granted Christopher's request for protection, only for the boy to be spirited away by an unknown party. The older brother listens to this new explanation and asks with a faint, chilling smile if that wouldn't be a terrifying scenario. He presses the point, asking how this mysterious intruder could have possibly slipped past the Earl's surely extensive security without anyone noticing. His voice drops, suggesting it would be incredibly foolhardy for anyone to antagonize an opponent capable of such a feat, causing the Earl to visibly tremble. With the threat hanging in the air, the brother suggests it is in everyone's best interest to simply drop the matter, then turns his pointed gaze to Elizabeth. In the carriage on the way home, the brother's calm demeanor vanishes as he confronts Lizzie directly, asking why she lied to him. With tears welling in his eyes, he tells her how terrified he was, thinking he was on the verge of losing both her and Christopher in one night. When Lizzie tries to downplay the danger, he erupts, asking what she would have done if the estate had guard dogs, a possibility she admits she hadn't considered. He gently reminds her that no matter how strong she becomes, she will always be his precious little sister, and she must learn to value her own life more. Turning to Christopher, he says the same holds true for him. As his kind, clever, and cherished younger brother, he must not sacrifice himself for others. Christopher replies tearfully that he loves them both deeply, but he feels he does nothing but receive their kindness without ever giving anything in return. It is for this reason, he explains, that he felt he was not worthy of being part of the Burton family. His brother smiles, telling him that family is not about worthiness but about mutual care. However, if Christopher truly wants to give something back, he has an idea. He asks Christopher to work with him to ensure that their family can continue to be a place where they all treasure one another, now and forever. He then adds that he could also use some help acting as Lizzie's chaperone, prompting a protest from Lizzie and a sharp question from her brother about who just called his cute sister, Bad Det. Christopher eagerly grabs Lizzie's hands and accepts the responsibility with fiery determination, confessing he has secretly been worried about her for a long time. He had feared that if she continued on her current path, she would never find a suitor willing to marry her. Lizzie is stunned to hear this from her brother, but he doubles down, vowing to make everyone understand her charms, even though she is technically engaged. Then, with the utmost gravity, Christopher declares that if all else fails, he will take full responsibility for her future. The older brother stares in disbelief, realizing Christopher has just vowed to care for his sister for the rest of his life should she become a spinster. Finding the image of her brother sacrificing his own life to care for her both touching and terribly sad, Lizzie decides she must find a husband to avoid turning him into Bad Det himself. As their older brother begins to chuckle, his anger forgotten, Lizzie pleads with him to object to Christopher's plan. She can't help but feel that his anger has simply been replaced by an entirely new and equally complicated problem. Elizabeth's morning squat routine is interrupted by a maid bursting into the room with urgent news. The maid breathlessly announces the arrival of Crown Prince Edward, causing Elizabeth to react with shock and confusion. She questions why the Crown Prince would be here, confirming with the maid that he arrived without an appointment. Annoyed by the breach of protocol, Elizabeth decides to quickly hear his business and send the unannounced royal visitor on his way. She meets the prince and lectures him that he should have sent word, but he dismisses her concerns, stating that he simply wanted to come. Elizabeth curtly asks his purpose for being there, hoping to expedite his departure, but he ignores her question and instead asks to be shown to her room. He adds with a quiet, somber smile that this might be the last time he gets to visit. His ominous words hang in the air, leaving Elizabeth to stare at him in stunned silence. The prince steps into her private quarters and confirms that this is indeed her room. Elizabeth reflects that the prince has recently stopped making his usual morbid jokes about dying, a change she attributes to her own habit of bluntly shutting them down. He is delighted to see a large teddy bear he once gifted her sitting in the room, surprised she kept it. With a warm smile, he confesses he assumed she would have given away all his presents, but Elizabeth reminds him that such a large item was a nuisance to transport. Her blunt mention of "never again" makes the prince's smile falter slightly. She internally laments his dramatic behavior, her most pressing concern being how to get this lingering crown prince to finally leave. He then reveals the true purpose of his visit. A healer has been found who claims to be able to cure his chronic illness. The prince explains that the healer resides in a Western nation and uses a combination of healing arts and surgical procedures, a medical practice not yet common in their own country. The treatment, he says gravely, is dangerous. He has been told the chances of success versus death are 50-50. Elizabeth immediately declares that a 50% chance is more than enough, as it is not zero. The prince smiles, saying he knew she would think that, which is precisely why he wanted to see her before undertaking the journey to meet the one person who believes in his life, not his death. They lock eyes, a moment of profound, unspoken understanding passing between them. He then asks if she would give him something of hers to take along, as the treatment and recovery will keep him away for at least 3 months. What he desires, he explains, is a keepsake to serve as a good luck charm, something through which he can borrow her seemingly endless vitality. In response, Elizabeth presents him with a massive survival knife, helpfully noting that it's also capable of gutting a boar, much to his astonishment. After being chided for her insensitivity, the prince jokingly suggests taking the teddy bear instead, earning him a glare from Elizabeth, who calls him dense. Elizabeth then offers another item, a large, metal nutcracker. He asks why on earth she keeps such a thing in her bedroom, and she explains that she used it for a time to train her grip strength. Now, however, she demonstrates that she can crack nuts with her bare hands, making the device obsolete. The prince, utterly flabbergasted, asks if she has ever given a normal gift in her entire life, though he concedes the grip trainer could be useful on his long journey. When asked what she gives to friends or her brother, the prince admits he has no friends to give gifts to, and his mother always picks out presents for his sibling. The prince notes with a sigh that it's true she and his brother Robert really do not get along. Although Elizabeth offers to find another item, the prince decides the nutcracker will do just fine. She sternly instructs him to return it when his business is concluded, as she borrowed it from the head chef without permission and will be in trouble if it's lost, adding that she expects him to come back. The prince, now holding the survival knife, remarks that since he has received such a fine gift, he must offer one in return. He suddenly takes the knife and, to Elizabeth's horror, slices off his long ponytail in one swift motion. The severed lock of hair, tied with its ribbon, falls through the air as he watches it with a calm, determined expression. He then offers the hair to the speechless Elizabeth, telling her to think of it as him while he is away. Elizabeth frantically recalls hearing from instructor colleagues that knights about to enter a deadly battle sometimes leave a lock of hair with their family as a memento. She realizes with horror that he has just given her a death token, but he explains he was only growing his hair as a good luck charm and no longer needs it now that he has her charm. He promises to make her a dress upon his return, and though she tells him to stop setting up death flags, he confidently states this flag will not come to pass. Several weeks after the prince's departure for the West, Elizabeth finds herself facing a new and formidable enemy, her final exams. While she excels in all practical subjects like etiquette, dance, and self-defense, the academic portions of the exams pose a serious threat. The grim possibility of failing and being held back a year looms over her, a fate she cannot accept as it would separate her from the game's protagonist. Despite extensive tutoring from Isaac, her brother, and Christopher, she recognizes that she has natural limits when it comes to scholarly pursuits. As her study efficiency plummets from exhaustion, she briefly considers practicing how to cheat before dismissing the idea as too risky. Deciding a break is in order, she heads outside to exercise but finds that Robert is conspicuously absent from his usual training grounds. Other students inform her that Robert has been acting strangely listless lately, and they sent him home after he was found just staring into space. They gossip about the widespread rumor that the crown prince is actually seeking a bride to marry into another nation's royal family, which would make Robert the new heir to the throne. As she listens to them chatter, Elizabeth realizes she must remember to ask the prince about the status of her and Robert's annulment when he returns. Elizabeth scans the posted exam results, searching for her name among the lists of students. She is pleased to see she achieved her target of a respectable upper-middle rank, a position designed to show intelligence without drawing too much attention, though she notes Isaac seems surprised to have been beaten. Another student, seeing Isaac in second place, wonders aloud who could have possibly taken the top spot. The list reveals the number 1 student is Robert Diaglan. Isaac, the academy's resident genius, sits with his head on his desk, utterly defeated by the results. Elizabeth recalls that in the game, Isaac is a brilliant character destined to be prime minister who always ranks first, with the sole exception of a rare event where the protagonist surpasses him. She is completely baffled as to how Robert managed to achieve something that should have been possible only for the game's heroine. Deciding she must cheer Isaac up, she reasons that if his depression continues and he loses to the protagonist on the next exam, it could trigger a hidden, high-value game event. Such an event would ruin her own plans, as it would lock the protagonist into Isaac's romance route, so she needs him to recover his confidence and get back to studying immediately. Approaching his desk, she tells him to stop looking so miserable, but he just mutters that he lost. He wails in agony at having been defeated by Robert of all people, prompting Elizabeth to ask if he has truly never lost at anything before. She reminds him that he is a strong man who has fought and clawed his way to the top despite being scorned by his family, and that the Isaac she knows would simply challenge his rival again. Visibly moved, Isaac looks up and asks if she really remembers all of that. He asks her if she recalls the very first day they met. She dismisses his surprise, saying of course she remembers, though she bluntly adds that at the time, he was just some untalented kid she paid little attention to. It was only by speaking to him that day, she explains, that she came to understand the kind of person he was, which is how their friendship began. She tells him that while he claims to have no talent, he possesses the greatest talent of all, the ability to persevere through hard work. Unlike so many others who give up when faced with a challenge, his true, innate gift is his refusal to surrender, which is how he has come so far. Her friend, Isaac Guilford, she declares with conviction, is not so fragile as to be broken by a single defeat. Elizabeth stretches, joking that being so serious is exhausting, and asks if he's feeling better now. Isaac reaches out and gently takes her hand in his. Later, Elizabeth sees Robert standing alone, looking dejected and lost in thought. Annoyed that he is so distracted he hasn't even noticed her approach, she decides to take action. She draws a practice sword and challenges him to a match. When he asks why, she coolly replies that knights should not need a reason to test their skills against one another. He starts to refuse, but she tosses her glove at him, a formal challenge he once taught her was unnecessary, and his expression hardens with resolve. As they spar, Elizabeth notes his swordsmanship is surprisingly sharp and fluid, far more efficient than his usual style. She realizes he must have been in this focused state during the exams as well, but his attacks are still too light. Though she disarms him, he immediately asks for another round. She agrees with a smirk, telling him to come at her until he can no longer stand. After a lengthy duel, Robert lies exhausted on the ground as Elizabeth compliments his newfound strength. He admits he is still no match for her, and she replies that she, too, is constantly growing stronger. Robert then confesses that his brother revealed the truth about his illness, asking him to be prepared to take the throne if necessary, and he is consumed with guilt for not having noticed his brother's pain. Elizabeth pulls out the nutcracker the prince gave her, explaining that it is something his brother entrusted to her. She hands it to Robert, telling him that he should be the one to hold on to it, secretly relieved to be free of the awkward keepsake. Clutching the tool, Robert tearfully wonders what he could possibly do for his brother. Elizabeth suddenly snaps, calling him a maggot and ordering him to stop moping and start training if he has so much free time. She screams that he must act now and not dare show his brother such a pathetic face upon his return, that his only option is to struggle with all his might. A smile returns to Robert's face as he looks up at his captain with renewed determination. He declares that someday he will become strong enough to defeat her. When that day comes, he asks if she will grant him a single wish. She agrees, as long as his wish isn't to stage a coup d'état, and laughs that she will look forward to their rematch. They share a moment of mutual respect and understanding, smiling at one another. Robert addresses her first as Captain, then formally corrects himself to Lady Elizabeth Burton. With a slight smile, he officially accepts the dissolution of their engagement. Thus, her long-held wish to break the engagement was granted with surprising and anticlimactic ease. Elizabeth finds herself standing alone in a vast, white, and empty expanse. She is suddenly holding a small cat and understands that she must be dreaming. It's the most docile cat she's ever held, leading her to wonder if this is a lucid dream. She then looks up and sees a young woman in a school uniform standing before her. In that instant, everything becomes clear. She realizes that this girl is the protagonist of the Otome game Royal Lovers. This is the person she must make fall for her, the one she is meant to pursue. As the second spring of her life at the academy approaches, she knows the protagonist's transfer is imminent, and she steels her resolve to be captured by her at all costs. A serious problem weighed on Elizabeth's mind, for while the annulment of her engagement to Roberto had concluded with a surprising and welcome peace, it had not solved her ultimate dilemma. The root of her current anxiety was the capture targets, whose hairstyles had changed so drastically from their original game designs that they were almost unrecognizable. She had to admit the new, shorter styles suited them all quite well, making them look even more refined and handsome than before. But their newfound handsomeness was the problem, as their short hair now clashed directly with her own carefully crafted masculine persona. This development was a complete reversal of her intentions, as she had cut her hair specifically to differentiate herself from them, leaving her wondering why they had all suddenly made such a change with the protagonist's arrival merely 2 months away. Now, in the short time she had left, she was forced to search for a new hairstyle that would not make her blend in with the very men she was competing against. And so, as the cherry blossoms fell, time marched relentlessly forward. Until at last, the fated day arrived at the Grand Academy. It was the entrance ceremony for new students, the day the game would officially begin with the protagonist's transfer into the second year, just like Elizabeth. Gazing at her reflection, Elizabeth reaffirmed her resolve, knowing that her entire plan to seize happiness by becoming a capture target in the Otome game Royal Lovers depended entirely on the next year. She reviewed her preparations to establish a flirtatious character, styled hair, carefully applied makeup, and even leather shoes with 10-centimeter hidden insoles to complete the illusion. Her physical training had also paid off, sculpting a lean, muscular physique that would be undeniably appealing if she were to roll up her sleeves. Admiring the finished product, she congratulated herself on a job well done. With a handsome face, impressive height, and a toned body, Elizabeth Burton was ready. Just then, her brother Christopher appeared at the door, calling out to his sister, prompting Elizabeth to turn and ask him what was wrong. A flustered Christopher declared that from now on at the academy, he would refer to her as senpai, a formal shift in address that immediately triggered Elizabeth's suspicion. Her first thought was that this was a simple sign of him growing up, like a boy in puberty deciding on a less affectionate name for a parent. She quickly realized, however, that this was the game's corrective force at work, an invisible hand pushing events back towards their predestined course. In the original story, Christopher introduces himself as just Chris, a character who intentionally hides his family background, so calling a classmate sister would directly contradict that core part of his personality, necessitating the change. There had been a lingering possibility that the game's story might not start at all, given the ways the 4 main capture targets had already diverged from their original selves, but Christopher's words were undeniable proof. The game was definitely going to begin, a fact Elizabeth accepted with calm understanding. With her determination solidified, she strode through the school halls, surrounded by adoring female students, her goal clear: she would absolutely be captured by the protagonist. She waited alone in the school courtyard, the stage for the first crucial event. This was the place where the protagonist, Lilia Douglas, was meant to meet the Crown Prince after getting lost while chasing a cat, the game's primary encounter event that would set his route in motion. Elizabeth found the prince's scripted reaction of finding a lost girl interesting to have an absurdly low bar, and she doubted she could pull off the elegant, practiced laugh of a flawless pretty boy character without it feeling awkward. The event was supposed to continue in the auditorium, where the protagonist would see the prince on stage and realize his royal identity, but Elizabeth knew a critical fact: the prince was not currently in the country. This absence made hijacking his event as easy as taking candy from a baby, especially since this encounter was designed as a direct counterpart to Roberto's own meeting, which was triggered by a cat appearing near the protagonist. The game mechanics were simple. Choosing to chase the kitten led to the prince, while calling the kitten over led to Roberto, with encounters for Isaac and Christopher following the ceremony, making this first choice a vital one for players wanting to pursue the prince. Since the Crown Prince had conveniently traveled to the west, Roberto was stuck backstage, cramming for the student representative speech he had to give in the prince's stead, his brief competence having evaporated, which not only allowed Elizabeth to steal the prince's event but also completely erased Roberto's event as a possible option. Therefore, the protagonist now had no choice but to trigger the encounter event in the courtyard with Elizabeth, a fact for which she silently thanked the absent prince, hoping he would stay away just a little while longer. A cat suddenly leaped from the bushes only to immediately flee from her presence, a harsh reminder that she was still hopelessly disliked by animals. And then she appeared, the protagonist herself, standing amidst the flowers and looking just as lovely as Elizabeth had imagined. Seeing her for the first time, Elizabeth's first thought was simple and clear: she was adorable. The game's description had called the protagonist plain and ordinary, but the girl standing before her was anything but. She was undeniably cute. Elizabeth's heart pounded with excitement. The protagonist was completely her type, and as she approached to ask if the girl was lost, she had to fight to maintain her composure. A strange, involuntary snicker of pure delight escaped her. Her mind briefly floated into a whimsical cosmos, picturing herself alongside a tiny cat in a space helmet. In that instant, an undeniable intuition washed over her, a certainty that needed no explanation. This girl was a reincarnated person, just like her, a true kindred spirit found at last. Elizabeth appraised the girl before her. While outwardly adorable, one's true nature lies within, and that strange, nerdy laugh was a serious character flaw. A wave of second-hand embarrassment washed over Elizabeth, clutching her own chest in discomfort. It was unacceptable for the protagonist, who should inspire heart-pounding romance, to instead induce cringing shame, a clear sign her previous life's habits were bleeding through too strongly. She questioned how any of the game's capture targets could possibly fall for a girl who made such a sound, wondering if, in this world that prized beauty, being cute was enough to excuse any odd behavior. If looks were truly all that mattered, then every capture target was an idiot, and she could not trust the country's future to such men. After all, even commoners didn't go around making noises like that. Deciding to push through her doubts, Elizabeth adopted a charming smile, asking the girl if she was a new student since she appeared to be lost, reasoning that with time and guidance, this girl might yet grow into a proper lady. At a minimum, Lilia simply had to become normal enough that Elizabeth wouldn't feel mortified being her love interest, so she smoothly offered to escort the lovely lady to the auditorium. Seeing that the girl was flustered but not rejecting her advance, Elizabeth decided to press the attack with one more push. She gave a dashing wink, offering a personal tour of the academy since fate had brought them together and promising to help her join the entrance ceremony without getting into trouble. With that, she began to lead the protagonist down the tiled hallway. Lilia followed nervously, her timid steps endearing to Elizabeth, who mused on the incredible power of cuteness until the girl began muttering to herself. The protagonist wondered aloud why, after choosing to chase the kitten, the encounter event with the Crown Prince hadn't triggered as it was supposed to. A bolt of panic shot through Elizabeth as she recognized a kindred spirit in the worst way. This girl was an otaku who spoke her thoughts aloud, just like her. This habit was dangerous, as knowledge of the game's plot was akin to prophecy in this world, a power many would seek to control, and it had to be corrected while Lilia was still perceived as a girl who just talked to herself a lot. Since Lilia had clearly played royal lovers enough to know the events, Elizabeth deduced she would actively try to trigger them, which provided a perfect opportunity. She would use Lilia's muttering to learn her plans ahead of time. It was the most rational strategy. To prevent Lilia from raising affection with the other targets and guide her onto her own route, Elizabeth would simply get to every event first and steal it for herself. Upon reaching the classroom, Elizabeth was greeted by the excited chatter of other girls, and she noted that most of her classmates were familiar faces. This was to be expected, as the academy divides students into a special class and a general class based on status and academics, with no roster changes within the elite special class. The door slid open and a man introduced himself as Kane Fisher, their new homeroom teacher, before announcing the arrival of a transfer student. Lilia Douglas stepped forward and gave a flustered, stammering self-introduction to the class. The sight was so overwhelmingly cute that Elizabeth had to cover her face, having momentarily lost all composure. This, she realized with awe, was the raw, untamed power of a protagonist, a force that a mere side character could never hope to withstand. Her gaze shifted to Roberto and Isaac, the only two students in the room who seemed completely unaffected by Lilia's charm. Maintaining one's composure in the face of such cuteness, she reasoned, must be a core requirement for being a capture target. The teacher then announced a seating change by lottery, a detail Elizabeth processed while noting that Kane himself was a secret capture target in a fan disc and therefore not a current priority. She drew a seat in the very front row and sighed internally at the lost opportunity for napping in class. Her disappointment instantly vanished as Lilia took the seat right next to her, and she leaned in to tell the startled girl that being neighbors was a great stroke of luck. Lilia, who had just been lamenting her bad luck, was now convinced she was so fortunate she could win the lottery, but just then, Isaac raised his hand to complain he couldn't see the board from the back of the room. Isaac was moved to the front of the row, displacing Lilia and taking the seat beside Elizabeth, who was now flanked by him as Lilia sat down directly behind her. A smug look from Isaac stirred a flicker of annoyance in Elizabeth. She briefly wondered if Isaac was deliberately trying to keep her from Lilia before dismissing the thought as too calculating for him. Though she was disappointed, she realized her new position behind her and to the right was the perfect angle to show off her handsome profile. Since Lilia already seemed intrigued, Elizabeth decided to leverage the new arrangement to her advantage, allowing the girl to gaze upon her from behind and cultivate her budding feelings. When lunchtime arrived, the other students immediately swarmed Lilia's desk, their curiosity piqued not only by her beauty but by the name Douglas and the rumors attached to it. The source of the rumors was the concept of a saint, one of the few truly fantastical elements in their world, a person capable of using the saint's prayer. This prayer was essentially healing magic, powerful enough to mend injuries and cure illnesses. The whispers among the nobility about Baron Douglas adopting the new saint were now confirmed, as a baron's child could never enter the elite special class unless she possessed such a legendary power. With the previous saint having passed away 50 years ago, the title had become a thing of myth for the younger generation, making Lilia's appearance as shocking as a mythical beast coming to life. Elizabeth cut through the crowd, approached Lilia's desk, and smoothly asked if she could call her by her first name. After getting Lilia's permission, she offered her help and guidance, all while feeling immense relief that the protagonist's name was the default. She doubted she could have maintained her composure if she had to address someone named Darkness Princess Knight. As Elizabeth prepared to introduce herself, Christopher's voice cut in, calling for his senpai, which made Lilia cry out his name in utter shock. Lilia, completely flustered by his appearance, asked if they had met, her confusion understandable since Christopher's hairstyle was different from his game counterparts, leading her to apologize for mistaking him for someone else. Ignoring the confusion, Christopher declared he had come to eat lunch with his senpai, which sparked a new worry in Elizabeth. Perhaps her brother was struggling to make friends. Before she could ponder it further, Roberto burst onto the scene, full of energy and zeroing in on Lilia. He gave a dashing bow and introduced himself as Roberto Diogrance, the second prince. Lilia then spotted another familiar face and shouted, "Isaac?" in surprise, prompting the real Isaac to calmly tell Roberto to conduct his loud reunion somewhere else. Confused, Lilia stammered that she didn't remember Isaac ever calling her by her first name, while he coolly told Roberto not to frighten the new student, acknowledging that her surprise was warranted since everyone looked different. Elizabeth intervened, smoothly explaining to Lilia that Isaac was just a difficult person by nature. Lilia apologized, explaining that she was new to the Baron's household and still unfamiliar with everything, but Elizabeth reassured her that it was perfectly fine to learn things at her own pace. A blushing Lilia smiled and offered a sincere thank you for the kindness. Elizabeth felt the immense pressure of that protagonist power, and knew she had to act decisively or be swept away by it. Steeling her resolve, she flashed a charming smile and offered to show Lilia the best items on the cafeteria menu, fully embracing her role as a capture target. Lilia looked around at the assembled group, her mind reeling from the fact that every single one of the capture targets looked different from the game. While Elizabeth maintained her cool exterior, Lilia could only wonder what could have possibly caused such a drastic change. A deep blush spread across Lilia's face as she stammered her thanks to Burtonsama for all the help that day. 2 weeks had passed since Lilia's transfer to the academy, and Elizabeth brushed off the gratitude, insisting that being kind to a lady in distress was simply a matter of course as she continued her dedicated support. That support had borne fruit. After tutoring her in the classroom and partnering with her in dance class, Elizabeth had finally succeeded in inviting Lilia to her home under the pretext of practicing manners, successfully triggering the coveted home date event. Taking a break for tea, Elizabeth inquired why Baron Douglas had not taught Lilia basic etiquette, as she had assumed any noble family, regardless of its origins, would provide such instruction. Lilia softly explained that the Baron had told her she didn't have to do anything. With a darkly shadowed smile, she continued, clarifying that it wasn't just the Baron, but that people had been saying that to her for a very long time for reasons she couldn't understand. Putting on a brighter, yet still pained expression, she laughed it off, guessing it was probably because she was incapable of doing anything right. She confessed that she had held on to the hope that becoming a saint and being adopted into the Baron's family would finally change things for her. The new title made her feel like she was finally becoming the protagonist of her own story, a sentiment she now looked back on as incredibly embarrassing and cringeworthy. Lilia had desperately hoped that being a saint would lead people to expect more from her, but in the end, nothing had changed at all. As Lilia spoke, Elizabeth sipped her tea and reflected. In a world that so heavily prioritized appearances, it was tragically believable that people would, without a hint of malice, genuinely think that a beautiful girl like Lilia didn't need to do or accomplish anything. That cruel passivity was the accepted normal of this world. Just as the handsome but flawed capture targets were always forgiven, the protagonist was also allowed to simply exist. Lilia admitted that despite being a saint, her power was so weak she could barely heal a paper cut, yet everyone told her that was perfectly fine. Tears began to stream down Lilia's face as she repeated their words, how everyone told her it was all right for her to be useless. This was not the outcome Elizabeth had wanted. She aimed to be a suave knight who made women swoon, not an awkward figure who made them cry, leading her to conclude that the world itself was deeply warped. As Lilia sobbed, Elizabeth worried about her own reputation if a maid were to see them, desperately wishing the girl would stop crying while Lilia lamented that she was only valued for her face. Elizabeth had been wary of calculated tears, but the raw despair in Lilia's weeping was unmistakably genuine. She warned her that rubbing her eyes so much would surely make them swollen the next day, but Lilia only cried harder, saying no one ever said anything of substance to her beyond calling her cute or saintly. Leaning forward, Elizabeth gently held out a clean handkerchief. "That's not right," she said with conviction, cutting through the girl's sorrow as Lilia lamented that she had no inner substance worthy of being seen. The question of how to improve one's inner self was a revelation to Elizabeth. This was the unique anguish of a protagonist, a problem she, who had painstakingly constructed her entire persona from nothing, had never even thought to consider. It was a struggle she could never truly understand, but she knew this was a critical moment. If she could find the right words to capture Lilia's heart, she could secure her interest for good. As a reincarnator who had played the game extensively, Lilia could easily capture any target, even the notoriously difficult Crown Prince. Elizabeth had to offer something more compelling, something that would make Lilia cast aside all other routes to pursue her alone. This was the turning point, and she frantically tried to channel the game's original characters, wondering what the prince, Roberto, Isaac, or Christopher would say in this situation. Before she could decide what her own suave knight persona would do, Lilia's quiet muttering broke the silence once more. The girl's habit of talking to herself had returned, and she confessed that she was bad with men, a rather unfortunate trait for the protagonist of an Otome game, prompting Elizabeth to pretend she hadn't heard. Lilia continued her monologue, admitting that while she was a fan of the Crown Prince in the 2D world, meeting the capture targets as real, three-dimensional men was a different story, though still better than the men from her past life. Men in her original reality had been cruel, casually calling her ugly or weird, making fun of her for being quiet and plain. In the end, it was always about her appearance. Whether she was considered pretty or not, she was judged on her looks, yet she felt she possessed no inner quality worth showing off. Elizabeth seized the opportunity, her voice firm and clear, as she told Lilia that she believed both her appearance and her inner self were equally precious. With a gentle smile, she leaned in and promised that if Lilia truly wished it, she could become an even more wonderful girl. Lilia protested that it was easy for someone as naturally cool as him, but Elizabeth countered with simple logic. If your inside is empty, you fill it. If something is missing, you add it, hinting that her own effortless persona was the result of hard work. She instructed Lilia to clearly imagine the person she wanted to be, to visualize an ideal and wonderful version of herself that she could strive for. She explained that it was all right if her actions didn't match her heart at first. By consistently acting the part, her inner self would eventually catch up, until one day she could proudly and confidently declare, "This is Lilia Douglas." And with a dazzling wink, Elizabeth offered to help her achieve that goal in any way she could, affectionately calling her Princess. Lilia stared, utterly captivated, and confessed that he was the first man whose words had never made her feel uncomfortable, a statement that made Elizabeth briefly panic as she remembered a crucial missing detail. In the chaos of being interrupted by Roberto and Christopher earlier, she had never formally introduced herself or, more importantly, clarified her gender. It was an astounding, unforgivable blunder for her carefully crafted suave persona. But interrupting Lilia now to correct the mistake would be even more awkward, so she made a snap decision to let the misunderstanding continue for as long as possible. Lilia then shyly admitted her own desire. She wanted to become a princess, the kind who is cherished by a prince. Though she was still afraid of men, hearing him call her a princess made that dream feel attainable for the first time, even if she felt she wasn't worthy of it just yet. Lilia looked down, her face flushed with a hopeful blush as she declared her desire to become a girl who wouldn't look out of place standing by Burton's side. As Lilia once again muttered her thoughts aloud, wondering how to get onto this mysterious new character's route, Elizabeth noted with resigned amusement that the protagonist was at it again. The very next day, a significant milestone was reached when Lilia initiated a conversation for the first time, approaching Elizabeth to thank her for the previous day's encouragement and ask to meet again. Elizabeth graciously agreed, all too aware of the daggers being stared into her back by the other young ladies of the class, an outcome she had deliberately engineered by loudly discussing her date with the new transfer student. To be a proper capture target, one must ignore such trivial jealousies, so she had meticulously crafted this scenario by reducing time with her own fan club to make a public show of giving Lilia special attention, all while maintaining her kind-to-everyone persona. Her dedicated efforts were clearly paying off, as Lilia had begun to shed her overwhelming social awkwardness, now able to hold a normal conversation and even offer smiles, a clear manifestation of her latent, protagonist power. More importantly, Elizabeth could see the undeniable affection shining in Lilia's eyes, an intense, sparkling gaze identical to that of her most ardent fan club members, which confirmed that this was far more than just wishful thinking on her part. Beneath the otaku mannerisms and reincarnator status, Lilia was a genuinely cute, honest, and earnest girl, a fact that stirred a faint, fleeting sense of guilt in Elizabeth for manipulating such pure feelings for her own survival. That guilt, however, vanished as quickly as it came, for Elizabeth understood a crucial truth. Lilia was viewing her not as a person, but as a capture target within the framework of an otome game. This was a world governed by game mechanics, where romantic dates meant nothing without the proper flags and parameters. A single point short, and the confession under the cherry blossoms would never happen. Lilia was actively trying to capture her, fully aware that achieving a romance meant a lifelong commitment, and as long as that happened, Elizabeth's own happy future was secured. But Elizabeth had absolutely no intention of following through on such a commitment. She was struggling to manage her own life and had no capacity to take on the burden of another's, especially since a marriage between two women was legally impossible. The only logical path, the only ending that made sense for her, was the friendship end. This ending conveniently lacked an epilogue, concluding with a vague promise of continued friendship, which would satisfy the game's requirements without trapping her in a real romance. She just had to be careful not to hold back too much, lest Lilia's attention wander to another target. Steering the relationship toward friendship could wait until the very end. For now, she had to commit fully, acting with the sincere intention of being captured by the game's determined protagonist. Just as she cemented her plan, a group of her female classmates approached, their expressions uniformly hostile. She recognized the scenario instantly, the classic jealousy event common in otome games, though she was surprised to find that this time, their anger seemed to be directed at her rather than the commoner Lilia. As Lilia hid behind her, Elizabeth mused on the inherent hardships of being a protagonist, a magnet for envy and scorn for no good reason. Lilia's excited internal monologue about the event starting was a welcome sign, and Elizabeth turned to the approaching girls with a placid smile, asking what was wrong with her little kittens. One of the girls stepped forward and declared that Burton had been paying far too much attention to Douglas lately, a complaint that was unfolding exactly as Elizabeth had hoped. It was undeniably pleasant to be fought over, making her wonder if all the handsome men of this world enjoyed such ego boosts on a regular basis, an irritating thought that was interrupted when a girl invoked Isaac's name. Elizabeth was puzzled as to why Isaac was being brought into this, just as Isaac himself appeared, flustered and begging the girls to stop their confrontation. Far from stopping, a girl accused Isaac of being a coward, declaring that they were only acting because he refused to do so himself. She then turned her fiery gaze on Elizabeth, demanding to know if she had any idea how Isaac must feel watching the two of them together all the time. The girl passionately recounted Isaac's silent suffering, how he waited with his study notes hoping for a chance to speak to Lilia, and how he endured the pain of watching Elizabeth dance with her in class. Isaac pleaded with them to stop, but they refused, insisting that they were doing this for his sake. They could no longer stand by and watch him look so dejected and miserable. Another girl begged Elizabeth, as Isaac's friend, to please include him in her activities, a plea that revealed a shocking new reality. The formerly aloof and unapproachable Isaac was now surrounded by a group of supportive girls. He was no longer just a loner, he was a beloved character being championed by a legion of young ladies. While Elizabeth had been focused on her own plans, Isaac had somehow transformed into a popular figure. Lilia even knew he was the top student in their year, a fact Isaac tried to humbly brush off. Seizing the moment, Isaac declared that as the top student, he was far more qualified to tutor Douglas efficiently. This direct, sales pitch-like approach was so very characteristic of him, and Elizabeth recalled with a faint smile that he had been diligently practicing his dancing as well. She also remembered who his first practice partner for the male part had been. It had been her, chosen with his blunt declaration, "Burton, you'll do." He had reasoned she was the logical choice due to her skill and her role as his mentor, and Elizabeth now realized that refusing his very public request for inclusion would earn her the animosity of every girl present. Antagonizing her classmates was not part of the plan. Demonstrating her magnanimity by valuing a friend over monopolizing the protagonist would surely raise her own standing in everyone's eyes. With a warm smile, Elizabeth agreed, playfully teasing Isaac that she never realized he was so lonely before welcoming him to their study group. Turning to Lilia, she explained that she had been thinking a smarter teacher was needed anyway and that his help would be a great asset to them both. She finished with a charming wink aimed at Isaac, telling him not to be a stranger and that he could ask her to dance anytime, because that's what friends were for. Isaac was left speechless, a deep blush spreading across his face as he struggled to process the sudden turn of events. As Elizabeth took his hand in a gesture of friendship, the onlooking girls let out a collective swoon. The entire classroom, with the sole exception of Lilia, erupted into a wave of enthusiastic applause for the heartwarming scene. Lilia could only stare, her mind lost in a galaxy of pure, unadulterated confusion. Seated together on a secluded bench, the two shared a quiet moment in the dappled sunlight. The opportunity had arisen after school, when Lilia asked to speak with her privately, with Isaac occupied by student council duties and Roberto away serving as the Crown Prince's proxy. It meant they would be undisturbed. For the first time, they were truly and completely alone. This bench, tucked away in the back garden, was the perfect stage for the Handmade Sweets event, a key scene that, in the original game, served as the secret meeting spot for the protagonist and the Crown Prince. The game's narrative explained that their difference in status forced them to meet in secret, and on this very bench, the protagonist would eventually offer the prince her homemade cookies, a simple kindness that would deepen their forbidden bond. Now, with the Crown Prince conveniently absent, this pivotal event was untethered, a free-floating opportunity that Lilia had clearly seized by leading Elizabeth to this exact spot. Her actions were nothing less than undeniable proof that she was actively using the game's own structure to try and capture Elizabeth. Elizabeth, of course, was more than willing to accept the challenge, and as Lilia nervously offered a bag of cookies, she played her part to perfection. The cookies themselves looked professionally made, nestled in a bag bearing the wax seal of a famous confectionery. Recognizing the seal, Elizabeth had to admire Lilia's audacity. The girl had more nerve than she'd given her credit for. She had been fully prepared to eat a piece of charcoal with a smile, but in truth, she valued taste far more than authenticity, especially since the primitive baking technology of this world made it nearly impossible for an amateur to produce anything decent. Her own culinary specialty, after all, was a rustic dish of leaf-wrapped fish cooked over a bonfire, which had earned such rave reviews as requires self-hypnosis to be considered edible during military training. The logical conclusion was that Lilia's baking attempt had failed, forcing her to pass off store-bought goods as her own, a far preferable outcome, which a truly noble capture target should have the grace to overlook. Taking a bite, she declared them incredibly delicious, earning a relieved and joyful smile from Lilia. She happily decided to keep the rest of the delicious, store-bought cookies for herself. Being a capture target, she mused, was an excellent business. She got to eat tasty treats and make a pretty girl happy just by smiling. Just as she was enjoying the moment, Christopher appeared, having spotted them during his walk. He cheerfully asked for a bite, and Elizabeth, falling back on old habits, playfully offered him a cookie directly, momentarily forgetting her suave persona and treating him like the child he insisted he wasn't. She immediately regretted the reflexive action, having given away a perfectly good cookie out of sheer habit, but Christopher was already declaring it delicious. A curious Lilia looked between them and asked what kind of relationship the two of them had. Elizabeth hesitated, debating whether to reveal their connection, but Christopher, sensing the moment, beat her to it by asking if his senpai hadn't mentioned him. With a proud little flourish, he announced that he was his senpai's younger brother, adding as an aside that he was adopted. Lilia's face lit up with delight, and she confessed that as an only child, she was deeply envious of anyone who had siblings. Elizabeth instantly recognized the line as an adapted version of something the protagonist says to the Crown Prince in the original game. The girl's potential was truly remarkable. She was skilled enough to adapt game strategies on the fly, a testament to her cheat-level abilities as a protagonist. She agreed that siblings were a wonderful thing, and for a while, the three of them continued their peaceful afternoon. In the days that followed, the bench became their regular meeting spot, a welcome routine that was blessedly free from interruptions, save for the occasional and now welcome intrusion by Christopher. The peaceful scene was suddenly shattered by a violent, intrusive memory, a falling maid, Christopher's desperate cry of, "Lizzie." The world warped as the memory continued, a maid tumbling towards her in slow motion. Her eyes, wide with shock, took in the scene from her past. In that split second of memory, she saw the true culprit, the one who had pushed the maid. The Crown Prince himself, returned at last. Snapping back to the present, she suppressed the immediate, violent instinct to grab and twist the arm of the man now standing before them, knowing such an act would lead to catastrophic trouble. Instead, she forced a brilliant smile, masking her shock and smoothly welcoming the crown prince back. The prince paused, a flicker of confusion on his face as if sensing a momentary flash of danger, but she coolly assured him it must be his imagination. He had been away for 4 months, yet he seemed to have grown taller and healthier. His entire aura changed in a way that couldn't be explained by simple recovery from illness. With a deeply emotional, tearful gaze fixed on her, the prince declared, "I've come back to you," a line so dramatic that Elizabeth barely suppressed a sigh. She immediately adopted a formal posture, welcoming His Highness home on behalf of the entire nation, which had been eagerly awaiting his return. The prince gave her performance a harsh critique, rating it a mere 30 out of 100. His attention then shifted to the girl beside her, and he asked who the young lady was, remarking on how rare it was to see Elizabeth in anyone's company. A jolt of panic shot through Elizabeth as she began to stammer out an introduction. Lilia, however, was completely frozen, her eyes wide with awe as she stared at the real-life prince. Elizabeth's mind raced, remembering Lilia's earlier confession of being a crown prince fangirl, and it was terrifyingly clear that she was completely starstruck, a very, very bad development. The girl was so stunned she was literally holding her breath, a disastrous situation that demanded immediate and decisive action. It was time for Plan B. With a confident smile, Elizabeth wrapped an arm around the still frozen Lilia and introduced her to the shocked prince as her lover. An awkward silence stretched between the three of them on the quiet garden path. Elizabeth quickly laughed, covering Lilia's flustered sputtering and dismissing her bold declaration as nothing more than a little joke. The crown prince simply smiled, a cool glint in his eyes as he called it an interesting joke. She knew that among nobility, interesting joke was a polite way of saying, stop telling such pathetic lies. So she immediately shifted tactics, formally introducing Lilia as the new saint who had transferred that spring. After a quick prompt from Elizabeth, Lilia managed a respectable, if flustered, curtsy and introduced herself to Crown Prince Edward as Lilia Douglas. Elizabeth was immensely pleased. The results of their etiquette training were clear, as the old Lilia would have likely performed a full-on sliding prostration in front of royalty, making her slightly fumbled words a definite pass. She praised Lilia's wonderful greeting, and the prince concurred, remarking that it was impressive for a former commoner and a testament to the excellent guidance of his ducal friend. The prince's smile and compliments sent Lilia into a state of silent, heart-eyed bliss. He then asked if the two of them had been practicing together, a question that Elizabeth saw was about to send Lilia into another mesmerized trance. Elizabeth confirmed they had a special training session at her home, explaining that Lilia's earnestness was so infectious that she got carried away with the lessons herself, which prompted the prince to ask if this training happened in her room. With a sly smile, the prince commented on the famously Spartan and barren state of Elizabeth's private quarters, though she corrected him that they had used the salon. A silent, electric tension crackled between the two rivals, with a completely oblivious Lilia caught in the middle. Deciding it was time for a strategic retreat, Elizabeth announced they shouldn't keep His Highness any longer, but the prince stopped them before they could leave. He asked if they could lend him a hand, explaining that he was currently short-staffed. They were led to the student council room, a holy sight Elizabeth had only ever seen from the outside but was now finally entering. Inside, they found Isaac buried under a mountain of paperwork at his desk. Isaac looked up, momentarily convinced he was hallucinating from exhaustion at the sight of both Burton and the Crown Prince, but the prince cheerfully confirmed they were real, explaining he'd brought Elizabeth along because she looked bored. With a weary sigh, Isaac conceded that their help was better than nothing, gesturing to the massive piles of documents awaiting their attention. The prince noted how diligently Isaac was working, who explained he was already preparing budgets for the swordsmanship tournament and the autumn festival, events still 6 months away. Isaac then questioned why the prince was already working in his formal attire immediately after returning from the Western country, and the prince simply replied that he came straight to the student council room after greeting the king. In the game, this duo was known as the student council pair, and the prince quickly fell into his role, delegating a task to Lilia by asking her to retrieve documents from the archives. Elizabeth started to offer to go with her, arguing that her suave knight persona couldn't allow a lady to carry heavy books, but the prince cut her off, insisting she stay and help him instead. He handed her a stack of old ledgers, assigning her a tedious budget comparison task, while Isaac suggested the prince should be the one to guide Lilia to the archives. Elizabeth again tried to volunteer, but the prince physically blocked her path, a smug look on his face. This was clearly his petty revenge for her almost twisting his arm earlier, but she could not allow either him or Isaac to be alone with Lilia in the archives, a prime location for high-contact, heart-pounding events. So Elizabeth changed her approach, loudly declaring that Isaac, being better with numbers, should handle the budgets, using a bit of coarse slang to make her point. The crude words, learned from a drill sergeant, were so shocking to the sheltered Isaac that he froze in stunned silence, giving Elizabeth the opening she needed to grab Lilia and make a swift exit. In the archives, Lilia reached for a book on a high shelf, a perfectly timed opportunity. Elizabeth moved behind her, easily retrieving the book from just over her head. A blushing Lilia thanked her profusely, and Elizabeth simply asked which book was next. Her proximity once again left Lilia completely flustered and tongue-tied. Elizabeth knew perfectly well she could have just taken the memo and retrieved the books herself, but a true capture target must always choose the option that maximizes physical closeness. Suddenly, the prince's voice echoed from the doorway, chiding Lizzie for her unladylike language just as a stepladder went crashing to the floor. Books began to rain down from the top shelf. The event had been triggered. Elizabeth shouted a warning as she moved to protect Lilia. She shielded the girl with her own body, successfully recreating the classic falling books heroic save scene in all its romantic glory. It was a perfect success, and she took a moment to enjoy the perk of being so close to a very flustered protagonist. Her triumphant moment was cut short by the sight of the crown prince, who stood watching them with an icy, thoroughly unimpressed glare. As she helped Lilia up, Elizabeth boldly blamed the prince for causing the accident by knocking over the ladder. He ignored her completely, telling Lilia it was getting late and that he would have a carriage send her home, before coldly ordering Elizabeth to stay behind and clean up the mess. The prince's sudden shift in attitude was jarring, but Elizabeth decided it was a small price to pay, considering his presence had been the catalyst for triggering all the library events. She agreed to help clean, and with Isaac also pitching in, the task was finished quickly. Later, back at her mansion, Elizabeth's workout was interrupted by a maid bursting in to announce that a dress had arrived from the prince. She initially dismissed it as another unwanted gift from Roberto, but the maid quickly corrected her. The dress was from the crown prince himself, a revelation that left Elizabeth utterly speechless. An elaborate, sparkling gown lay spread across her bed, filling her with a terrible sense of déjà vu. She stared in horror at the accompanying jewels, a dreadful suspicion forming that the prince might have made them himself. Her maid fretted over the implications. For the crown prince to send a dress, a traditional act of courtship, so soon after she had broken her engagement to his brother was a scandalous development. Elizabeth reasoned that the prince, in his eagerness to show off his handiwork, had likely let his pride override proper etiquette, creating an emotionally heavy situation that felt more burdensome than a set of thick curtains. Infuriated that he had circumvented her ability to refuse by sending it directly to her home, she resolved to send it back immediately. The maid protested that they couldn't possibly return a gift delivered by a royal carriage with a note saying wrong address, but Elizabeth countered that it is the duty of a loyal subject to point out their sovereign's mistakes. Her subsequent plans to return it in person or have her brother do it were also shot down as being even worse options. She sighed in frustration, wishing he had sent a simple, uncomplicated gift like food from his trip, which sparked a sudden, brilliant idea. It was a souvenir. It all made perfect sense. It was a souvenir from his trip to the Western country, and also a get-well-soon gift after her broken engagement, especially since gifting clothing is a customary form of apology in that region. With her logic flawlessly established, she instructed her maid to inform her father that she had received a lovely souvenir from the prince, and to have it put away for safekeeping in the warehouse. Very deep in the warehouse, where it would never need to be looked at again.